Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to part 4 of this 4-part series of the rise of Nazism. Okay, the first 3 parts we dealt with A, the rise of Hitler in a political sense, B, second class we dealt with the actual war that he and his generals fought until his defeat. Last week we discussed the Holocaust and the Nazis' racial policy towards the Jews and how they were exterminated and genocide and how all of it came to be. And tonight we're going to be dealing with a completely different question that really affects us. I mean, of course, everything affects us. I mean, as we talked about, that Hitler not only killed 6 million Jews, but he also 55.5 million people perished in World War II. And not only that, but he's literally changed the balance of power for the next 50 years. There was an extremely cold war going on between the West and the East. I mean, and we feared the Soviet Union. I mean, they were the great enemy. You know, they were the adversary until the early 90s when communism fell apart. But this was all due to World War II, gave rise to the communist system. So he had an effect over a tremendous amount of our lives. I mean, even we talk about technology, what rose up from World War II, etc. But tonight, we're going to be facing a question about theology, about the question of God. Because as Jews, of course, you know, we all have dealings with God. I'm not saying we all believe in the same thing, because I'm sure, as it says, ein parts the same Shabbos, ein dayin same Shabbos, just like their faces are not alike, their ideas and their beliefs are not alike. So every Jew has his own idea of what God is and of how he relates to the world and what our relationship with God is, etc., etc. So, but overall, we can talk a little bit about this idea called faith after the Holocaust. Because what happened was on April the 30th of 1945, Hitler killed himself. Not soon enough, but at least he did himself the honor of getting rid of him, so we wouldn't have to put him on trial. So he did kill himself. And shortly afterwards, Germany gave up. I mean, there was victory in Europe, VE Day, victory in Europe. The Nazis were defeated, and just shortly after that, in I think August of 1945, there was the cessation of war in Asia, and that concluded World War II. When the Allies came in to liberate the concentration camps and the death camps, through the Russians, through the Americans, and through the British, they couldn't believe what they saw. I mean, the world took basically a collective gasp. I mean, to see the horrors of what was going on and to see the survivors. I mean, we've all seen pictures, we've all seen film clips of what went on over there. I mean, these people were they didn't look human. I mean, the survivors, I mean, were down to 80, 70 pounds. I mean, they were skeletons. They had been forced to work hard, not eating. The bones, everything that went around with the Holocaust and the extermination camps and everything, I mean, just caught the world by surprise. I mean, they might have known about it, and they might have heard about it, but no one really knew to what extent this was going on. I mean, as we discussed last week, in 1943-44, at the height, Auschwitz was killing 8,500 people a day. I mean, this was not easy, as we talked about, but this was going on day after day, month after month, year after year, until early of 1945. So when the Allies came in, I mean, they were just flabbergasted. I mean, it was a genocide of the most enormous proportion, and there's no way that we could deal with it on a humanistic scale. I mean, the best we could hope for is that it should never happen again, and that this it happened, but should never happen again. But you know, hope against hope. We see that it didn't teach us anything, because we see that from 1945 until the present day, there's been one genocide after another genocide after another genocide, and it just keeps going on. And I don't want to sound pessimistic, but it just doesn't look good. I mean, human beings just don't learn from the past. But we're trying to isolate this event of World War II and how it relates to us. And now we're faced with an enormous question. I mean, one of extreme proportions. And that was, where was God in all of this? I mean, we're a nation of faith. We believe in God. We believe that God has some kind of influence in what we do. And we want to believe, we truly want to believe that if God had wanted to, he could have stopped the Holocaust. Killing Hitler, doing a number of different things, he could have stopped it. And he didn't. For some reason, he did not intervene in the Holocaust. He didn't show up, and we were faced now to think of where was he? What's going on over here? I mean, we were led to believe that we have some kind of a covenantal agreement with him. I mean, and for the most part, the people that perished in the Holocaust were righteous, good people, innocent people that were slaughtered like sheep. So tonight we're going to deal with that kind of question. I mean, I'm afraid to say, and I don't want to disappoint you, that I don't think we're going to come to a conclusion. I mean, because this is an issue that we've been debating not only for the past 60 years, but for the past 600 years, and probably for the past 3,000 years. Since Jews were in Egypt and they were asking themselves, where is God? I mean, if we read today's portion that we're going to be reading on Shabbos, it's Shemos, the first exile. Pharaoh was killing up to 300 Jewish babies a day in order not to allow Moses to live. And Jews at that time, Vayonchu, they were groaning and they were crying out to God. Where are you? What's going on? And why are we suffering like this? So this is a question that over and over again in history gets asked. But I think what we could do and what we should do and what we will do is, at least tonight, we're going to attack this problem from two parts. One is an emotional response. We see how people react emotionally to this kind of a situation. And then, for the most part, we'll deal with it on a theological, intellectual basis. And we'll try to bring up a few points and a few different positions that people have taken, and then allow you to make your own conclusions of what you want to do. And then I'll sum it up by giving my own thoughts about what I feel. We have to first deal with the reaction of the survivors, because they were the ones that actually went through this hell. What really, if we studied, what was the reaction of the survivors after they came out of the camps to this specific question of how do you deal with this theologically, emotionally, and practically? What are you going to do about it? Separately, we have to deal with our reaction. I mean, those that were not Holocaust survivors, children of Holocaust survivors, other Jews that lived in the United States, far away, removed from the Holocaust, but also feel the pain and what went on, the suffering of their brothers and sisters that went on in Europe. What kind of reaction did they have to this? I mean, of course, you can't compare someone that grew up in Oklahoma or in Kansas City or in Detroit to someone that actually went to Lodz or was in the ghetto and transported to Auschwitz. I mean, their experiences were completely different, but doesn't matter. The theology is still the same. I mean, when Jews in America find out that 6 million Jews are killed in Israel, killed in Europe, it has an effect. I mean, just take, for example, we've lived through the latest Intifada. I mean, we know what our reaction is when we hear another suicide bomb go off. We know that we get a tracer in the stomach, we get a pit in our stomach to find out what's going on. So just imagine, extrapolate that, and if 5 people get killed in a suicide attack, this is 1,000,000 times 5. So imagine hearing this for day after day, day after day, day after day for 5 years. It has a profound effect upon us. And also, how did the world react to this? I mean, what was the reaction of the greater world? I mean, there was Christianity primarily. I mean, the Muslims, really didn't have much interaction, within World War II. I mean, even though they fought in North Africa, I mean, big wars. But for the most part, I'm really interested in the Christian theology of how did the Christians react, because this was perpetrated by. It wasn't only Christians, as we'll see later on, but primarily Christians, and also primarily Catholics, because there was a lot of Catholics. Hitler and Göring and others, head Nazis, were born Catholics. Whether they remained or whatever it is, we don't care. But what was the reaction of the Christian world to this theological problem of where was God? I mean, good Christians. I mean, people living here in the United States who had nothing, who fought World War II, who went over with Patton, went over with Eisenhower and fought the war against Nazism, partisans, Polish partisans, Ukrainian partisans, French partisans, the British Army. I mean, all of these people that fought against Nazism. And what about the people in the countryside? What about the people that were in occupied lands? I mean, how did they react to what was going on? The Germans themselves, the German people, who, even if you agree with Daniel Goldhagen in his book, Hitler's willing executioners. I mean, no, that was not only Hitler and the SS, but it took out millions of people to back Hitler up. But the average German was not a member of the SS. The SS numbered in the thousands and the Germans numbered in the tens of millions. What was the reaction of a German? Just, who's living in Dresden, or living in Cologne, or living in Berlin, or Munich. His reaction, their reaction to this whole thing. So that's one thing that we're going to have to discuss this evening. And then we want to break it down into two parts, as I mentioned to you before. One is practical, emotional. What did they actually do? What did the survivors do after the war? When they came here to America, or they went to Israel, or they went to all over the country. My parents ended up in Canada, but there was a number of different countries that accepted Holocaust survivors all over the world, from Australia to Argentina, all over the world. What did they do? How did they react to this? And then, last but not least, and the major part of tonight's discussion will be the theology of it. I mean, how can we, as human beings, with limited understanding, but a will to know, going to be able to explain this? And if your child would ask you, Dad, Mom, what went on over here? I mean, because people do ask this question over and over again, where was God and what happened? So we begin by talking about the survivors and their emotional response. For many survivors took the approach, and my uncle among them, my father among these people would fall into this category. They didn't want to debate it. They became extremely religious. They turned into religion as a comfort zone. They blocked this out from their minds. This was hell, but I'm not going to discuss it. I'm not going to debate it. I'm not going to deal with this issue of where is God and what is God and how God did this. It doesn't affect me. I'm Jewish. I'm going to find solace in study, in observance, and in practice, and in building a family. That's it. My father never wanted to debate the Holocaust. Didn't say God existed, God didn't exist. To him, it was a non-issue. It was a non-issue that he was not going to deal with this question. Whether it was out of fear, or whether it was out of just simply a survival mechanism, that he didn't want to have to come to a conclusion that he didn't want to have to come to, I don't know, because he wouldn't discuss this. My uncle doesn't want to talk about it. He's still alive. He's written now 16 or 17 books on the Talmud. He became a great scholar after the war, threw himself completely into study, raised his children very, very Orthodox. All my cousins in New York are Orthodox, Hasidic. I mean, was just very, very religious. Doesn't discuss it. To him, it's a non-issue completely. And when you sit down, he doesn't care. What's the difference? They're gone. I say Kaddish for my parents. I say Kaddish for my sister and my aunt that passed away. That's what he does. He observes it. He doesn't deny that there was a Holocaust. Obviously there was a Holocaust. But in theology and in practice, extremely religious. And this way, many people dealt with this way. Many people dealt this way. They became extremely, very, very, very religious. Okay? That was one reason why. Because they had no desire to debate. They didn't want to, for whatever reason. Second, many of them, survivors, saw actual miracles in the death camps. Literally miracles in the death camps. So when you experience a miracle, and you're kind of now discombobulated because you know that the entire situation, 6 million died, but you were saved. The commandant counted, the next 10 will be shot and you were number 11. Or 10 will be shot and the gun didn't go off, so they sent you back to the barracks. Or 10 will be shot and they turned around a moment and left. Or, as we talked about last week, Kenny's uncle, who got dressed up as a Nazi officer, thinking to himself that this is going to be the best way to survive, and with the swastika to be found by the Russians. And the Russians look at this guy and he's dressed in a swastika. Remember, we told this story. They were ready to line him up to shoot him, and his tefillin saved him. So to him, this was a miracle. So a miracle after miracle happened to these people. And when it happened to these people, what did it do? It didn't divorce them from God. It just once again reiterated that God does exist. Why this is happening around them, I don't know. But to me, God was shining His graces on me. And time after time, when I was starving, when there was nothing left to eat, when I thought I was about to go, I found a potato. There was an angel there. Or I was about to go and some guy, by sheer luck, happened to drag me off the train. I was on the train, I was the last guy, I didn't make it on the train going to Auschwitz. I stopped. There's a whole book. If you want to read something unbelievable, there's a book called Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust by Yafa Eliach. She claims, and I believe her, that she did not publish a story unless she could verify it. That either she heard it from the person itself, who it happened to, or a son or a daughter. So it wasn't a tale that went from one person to another person, but she documented it. She has names, she has things written over there, and these are literally modern day miracles. Because we talk about miracles from the Baal Shem Tov, we talk about miracles going back to Vilna, to Moses. These are modern day miracles that happened for whatever reason. I mean, if you watched Schindler's List, you saw over there time and time again how just you could call it coincidental, you could call it whatever, the little girl when he saves her with the finger. I mean, one thing after another. And these people took this as a personal message from God that He was literally watching over them. Because there's absolutely no reason why I should have existed and I should live when everybody around me was dying. In the Einsatz group we talked about last week, they were just shooting people. Rabbi Lau, the chief rabbi of Israel, former chief rabbi, he's not the chief rabbi anymore, the former chief rabbi in Israel was in a pit. I mean, his parents were there, he was in a pit, they shot him, someone fell on top of him, he was a little boy, they thought he was dead. I mean, he lay there until it was all quiet, pulled himself up, got out of the pit, and survived. I mean, what can you say? And believed wholeheartedly that there was an angel literally wrapped around him and protecting him.
Well, I need to confirm this because I'm a result of
a miracle.
My father was in Dachau in one of the camps, and the commandant of that particular camp happened to be humane, and he allowed my father and inmates to go out. And it's a farm area. I had visited it, to bring in the cows, whatever, and slaughter them and feed them. So after the war, my father and the inmates wrote a petition. This commandant was arrested, of course, and he was an angel. My father survived. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here. I couldn't believe it, but I did visit the family, and it happened to be.
It happened. There's no question that people did experience these kind of events in their in their lives, and this. It concluded to them, and they made the conclusion not based on theology, not based on some deep thinking, and sitting down and philosophizing, but simply on an emotional basis that God allowed them to live. There was a general in Israel. His name was off the top of my head. I'm thinking of this story. Ben Gal. What was his first name? Avigdor Ben Gal. Okay, Avigdor Ben Gal. He was a former general in the Israeli army. I think they used to call him Janusz. That was his nickname. He was, think about this for just a moment. At the end of the war, he was 8 and his sister was 6. They ended up somewhere, they were Polish, they ended up in Russia. Literally in Russia, somewhere, either it was close to Siberia, Tashkent, one of the stands, Khuzestan, Akistan, Pakistan, one of those Turkish stands. He was 8 and his sister was 6. They walked from Russia to Palestine. Okay? He held her in his hand, he held her hand, and they literally walked from town to town to town to town, begging, subsisting, getting a ride here, obviously, taking a boat to Palestine, came to Palestine, and eventually he became a general in the Israeli army. Now these are miracles. Now, not everyone that who claimed a miracle happened to them became extremely orthodox or traditional or observant, but many did. Many people took this as a sign from God that they have to do this, and that was it. Now, I would say, for every one that went this way, there was probably 10 that went the other way. Meaning that not on a theological basis, not on something that they sat down and thought about it, but they just rejected it. They just rejected the whole idea of being observant, of following God's commandments, not because they maybe believed in God or didn't believe in God. Of course, the knee-jerk reaction to these people would be, do you believe in God? They would say no. They would say, who knows? But who cares? I mean, it makes no difference right now. To us, he wasn't there and we're not here. There's no more relationship. They can't see a relationship. Many of my relatives went that way. Now, there's an interesting study in this idea, because again, this is not theological. It's not that these people sat down, they were great professors of philosophy, and they came to a conclusion that God doesn't exist. To them, this was a knee-jerk reaction. There's no reason really to be observant. I mean, many people who came to Canada, I grew up in an area that was full of what we called greeners. Greeners were Holocaust survivors that came over like greenhorns. You know, they were called greeners. When I used to walk through the what do you call it? It's not the supermarket, but the shopping center, to buy my father the Jewish newspaper Sunday morning, there were literally hundreds of people speaking Yiddish there. Literally hundreds of people, and then it was just sad to see that as years went by, and I used to come back either from yeshiva or after I got married, how they dwindled. I mean, a Sunday morning it was packed when I was a little kid, and then got a little older, it was half, but now they're almost all gone. You know, by now it was just sad to see the whole thing. But the majority of these people were not observant. They might go Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur to shul. They might do something, you know, to keep them connected to the community. But by and large, for whatever the circumstances were, whether it was because they got jobs that didn't allow them to keep Shabbos, you know, and many of them became pressers. I mean, what skills do they have? You come to Canada, they're not electing you to Parliament. You know, you're going to be a presser, you're going to be a tailor, you're going to be a shoeman, whatever you can do. Now, if in those days, we're talking about in the 40s, there's no unions to protect you, nothing to do. So they worked, and if they had to work on Shabbos, so be it. To them, it didn't make any difference. They were store owners and all of that stuff. And the need. And as I mentioned to you, give me 1 second, Marvin. As I mentioned to you, when I was a student, a rabbi, studying to be a rabbi in Morristown, New Jersey, we had routes that we would go visit on Friday afternoons to encourage people. They were called Mivtzoyim campaigns, the Rebbe's campaigns, all of these things. We would go from town to town in New Jersey. We ended up in Maplewood, and we ended up with this tailor who was a Holocaust survivor, absolutely did not want to put on tefillin. Never wanted to put on tefillin. Just didn't make any difference to him. He said, no, I'm not going to. I went through the camps, and there was nothing we could say to him. What possibly, how can you argue with this guy? There's absolutely no way, because here we were, young pishers, you know, rabbis grew up in Canada or in the United States, you know, well-fed, they knew of no problem. And this guy who went through hell, there was no way that we could emotionally connect to this guy. We were talking theology, and he's talking, you know, going through Auschwitz. So these people just rejected the question. Where is God? I don't know. I don't care. You know, have a good day. Now, the rebuttal to these people, not to rebut them on their feelings, because their feelings are completely real. I mean, when someone says that, you know, I went through hell, you know, they actually did go through hell, so their feelings are true. But just the rebuttal on the side of, you know, I don't believe in God because of the Holocaust, and then I'm not talking about an emotional basis, because emotions you can't argue. If I tell you I'm hungry, I'm hungry. You might say to me, you chazer, you what you are. You just ate there a 16,000 calorie meal, but I'm hungry. What do you want from me? I'm a growing boy. You know, I need to have another couple of cookies or something like that. You can't argue with me. Intellectually, I might understand you. Just like, you know, when you talk to a smoker about smoking, it'll tell you 50 reasons, a doctor can tell you 50 reasons why you shouldn't smoke. It's from emphysema to lung cancer to every illness connected to mankind is connected to smoking. It's great. But I love to smoke. There's nothing better. For those of you who are smokers, know what I'm talking about, that a cigarette is a wonderful, wonderful habit. It's great, it feels good, it makes you feel good, it keeps you thin. For many people, I was a skinny pickle when I smoked. The moment I gave up smoking, baluna, you know, I ate, you know, that's Mark is agreeing with me there in the back, that's what it was. So the rebuttal to these people simply is, I don't believe in God, as I just saw a great argument to this. Now again, you have to understand, you have to stretch this a little bit. The Holocaust was perpetrated by whom? Who perpetrated the Holocaust?
Nazis.
Who?
Nazis.
No. No. You see, there was one common denominator among all the people that participated and perpetrated. No, it wasn't anti-Semitic because it was not racial ideology either, because it cut across all boards. I'll just prove. Give me 1 second. It wasn't economics because they came from rich, they came from poor, they came from all over. It certainly wasn't. We'll start with nationality. Was it nationality? No, because it wasn't all Germans. The Slavs, the Ukrainians, the Poles, across French, Dutch, everybody, a lot of different nationalities participated in the Holocaust.
Jesus?
Was it religion? No, it wasn't religion because many of them were atheists. They didn't believe in any God whatsoever. So there were atheists among them, and even among Christians, it wasn't just regular. There was Catholics, there was Lutherans, there were Protestants, there were Eastern Church people. So it certainly wasn't religion, and it wasn't even, I want to argue, wasn't even racial ideology or political ideology, because many of these people didn't belong to the Nazi Party. So the Germans belonged to the Nazi Party and did this, but many people did not belong to the Nazi Party and still participated in the Holocaust. You know what the one common denominator, I was also fooled when I saw the answer. The one common denominator that united every single one of these people, you know what it was?
Hate Jews.
Well, the historians said hating the Jews. I mean, they were all Europeans. All Europeans. They were all Europeans. And I read that, I said, you guys right. Is that your car, Pierre?
No.
If you do me a favor, if it's not, just blow it up. All right. You know what? So, therefore, all Europeans. Now, what's the logical conclusion? If they're all Europeans, we all admit, right? I mean, whether it was Lithuania, whether it was Poland, whether it was Russia, whether it was Germany, it was all in Europe. The Holocaust took place in Europe, right? Even Greek, all of these things were all Europe, right? Is there anybody that says, I don't believe in Europeans? No, right? Even as how bad they were and how many atrocities the Europeans committed, no one turns around and says, I don't believe in Europeans. So therefore, take it theologically outside of this argument. So let's say you say this, God is the worst God. He's a bad God. But you just admitted you believe in Europeans, even though they're bad people. And yesterday you believed in God, so the extension is, why should God disappear? Why should God disappear? But the real underlying theme of this argument of God does not exist among Holocaust survivors is not so much a theological, like I mentioned to you before, that they sat down and thought it through, but it's just an emotional thing. I don't want to do it anymore. If you have bad parents, if you have really, really wicked bad parents, and they completely abuse you, the last thing you want to do is what? Obey them and honor them, right? So last thing you want to do. I mean, they locked you in a closet, they beat you. Well, you have no relationship with them. And I think that is really the disaster of the Holocaust survivor movement, is that what the Holocaust did was rip from them any sort of a belief in something. I mean, that's one of the unfortunate byproducts, of the Holocaust, besides the actual death of the 6 million. Marvin, go ahead.
Was there any correlation between what these people were before, how observant they were before, how observant they were before, and in which way they went?
I tell you, I didn't read a study, although I'm sure studies were done. I can only tell you from experience, seeing around my own neighborhood, which was kind of a small microcosm, of Europeans, because there were Poles and there were Russian Jews. There were all different kinds of Jews, and I would say that there was a good smattering of all, because in our minds we want to believe that many of the people prior to the war were religious. It wasn't so. It wasn't that everybody in Poland and Russia, and in Lithuania and in Hungary were all religious. Many of them were non-religious. But I would say that I would tend to say that it came across the board. I mean, there were many Hasidim that, after the war became non-religious, and then there were some that were non-religious that stayed non-religious. I think it was really a mixture of everything. Pierre, not your car? Okay.
It's good to have a car that doesn't have noise.
What?
We don't have it. We have an old car.
There you go. All right. It's just what you want. It's just a distraction, but we shall overcome, because we're survivalists. We're survivalists. Go ahead.
You know what bothers me, this term religious and not religious, rather.
Observant. No, it's observant versus non-observant. In this particular case, we're going to talk about observance versus non-observance. In this case. But then we're going to come down, when it comes to a theology, it's going to be religious versus non-religious, because now it's not talking about anymore about observing anymore. When we start talking about arguments within theology, has nothing to do about who's observant, who's not observant.
But could you be religious and not necessarily totally observant?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what I'm saying.
Statement from people like, oh, I'm not religious. Well, maybe you really are religious. You're just not observant.
Those people who say that are lacking in their understanding of what religious. There are people who believe in God and don't observe. They have a personal relationship. They're spiritual. These are religious people but not observant. But we're not talking about that just yet. We're talking about people here, observant versus non-observant, without the theological underpinnings, whatever that means. They're not thinking about it. They don't care. It's a gut reaction, finished. I'm not.
So they may be observant but not necessarily feel...
There were people who felt that. There were people with a big hole in their heart that were observant that felt nothing. That if you actually scratched them and went in and took them into a corner and asked them, they would just fall apart on their theological basis and their belief system. But they didn't care. They didn't care. Because to them, this was an island, this was a safe haven, this was a place where you didn't have to think much about it. I mean, you know what? We all have those kind of, we all have those kind of retreats, right? You know, when we're little children in a range, what do? We crawl under the covers, right? We crawl under the covers. JP, you want to do me a favor, please? What? It's not my car, but do me a favor. Go to the front desk and tell them, please, to have the car towed. Thank you. No. What? There's no one in the front desk. No. But I mean, it could be one of 300 cars, of course, tonight. Our mazel, you know. But now we're going to go on to the main topic for this evening, and that is the theological questions about how we deal with this disaster. Because emotionally, we all know how we're going to take it, but many of us, none of us were there. So we have one little strong advantage, is that we're not as emotionally tied up. I mean, you talk to a Holocaust survivor, you can't even talk to them. If they're, they don't want to talk about theology, then you could sit there and you could be talking to a guy from the 16th century about an iPod. I mean, that's about as close as you're going to get. There's absolutely no common ground when you're talking about it. But here, with us, we want to talk about theology. First, as an introduction, we really have to set our standards and our basis and our definition of God. What do we mean by God? When we talk about God, God is good, God is this, God is that, what do we actually mean by that? Judaism and Christianity, and for a great part Islam as well, all Western religions have, for the most part, defined God by three words. One, omnipotent, that God is all-powerful. That means He can and He will and He does interfere with this world, with nature. He basically controls everything. He is omnipotent. There's no part, there's no place, there's no avenue, there's no hiding from Him. He can do everything. He's all-powerful. Second description of God is omniscience. Omniscience, sorry. I come from Canada, it's very hard to pronounce that. In French it we called all-knowing. He's all-knowing.
It's omniscient.
Omniscient, right?
Omniscient.
Omniscient is, He is all-knowing. Omniscient. He is all-knowing. There's nothing that's hidden from Him. He knows what lurks in the heart of man. He knows what's going to happen in the future. He knows what's going to happen, what happened in the past. He just knows it all. He's all-knowing. And third, and here's where we come to the biggest dilemma, is this omnibenevolent, that God is all good, that there's nothing within God that is bad. Now the three different religions somehow differ a little bit on this benevolence, because, is He all good, so where does evil come from? But that's a whole different talk. At another time we'll just talk where evil emanates from. But basically these three ideas are the cornerstone of how we describe God in all Western religions. He's all-powerful, all-knowing, and he's good. Now, if he's good, and he's all-powerful, and he knows everything, now that behooves us to now discuss what happened. What happened to him? And how could he be? How can we somehow answer this contradiction? That if we have on one side these three descriptions, and we have this Holocaust in front of us, I mean, this is not an illusion, and we're not delusional. We saw 6 million people, and as the death camps began to, we start to uncover facts and figures and more numbers, the enormity of this idea just became supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. We've never seen anything before like this. How can the two coexist? I mean, I'm a person. I want to think of myself as a semi-intelligent person. You know, I'm not a great philosopher, but I want to think of myself as somewhat of an understanding person. How can I sit here as a rabbi and try to somehow answer this question? How can you do it? So the easiest way, of course, would be to say the number one, because we'll go through a number of different theological positions, because there's many theodicies, as they call them. There's many answers to this. Many, many answers. Okay? The first one is probably the lazy man's answer. The lazy man's answer to this is do nothing. There's no difference. No difference. God was God before, God is God after. Nothing. No, to them, no new response is needed. No. The Holocaust is a horrific tragedy. It's terrible. It's unbelievable. And we should investigate. Think about the Holocaust. Wonder why good things happen to bad people and discuss it and debate it. But ultimately, the Holocaust does not change our theology. It just doesn't. Nothing happened. You know what? God, if in 1935 you believed that God is A, B, and C, all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good, in 1945, he's still all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good. That's it. Finished. And what do we do with all of these questions? Nothing. Nothing. God hasn't changed. Now, I call that the lazy man's, not because it isn't a valid theological position. It is a logical position. This is what I want to believe, and this is the way I set it up, and this is the way I want to do it. But it's just that you really are not, you're not really heading on, you're not facing the question head on. You're taking a very, very cold position. A very cold position. You don't want to do it. Another position would be, and this came primarily from the Orthodox movement, some in the Orthodox movement. If we open up a siddur, especially if you're looking at the Musaf of the high holidays, it says in there, because of our sins, we were exiled from our land. What does that mean?
A punishment.
That's what it is. This is a punishment. Means that if you go back in Jewish history and you read Jeremiah and you read Lamentations and you read the books of the Old Testament, what do you see what happened in the destruction of the first temple? What did God say over and over again through the words of the prophets? That if you don't listen to me, what's going to happen? Turn to Deuteronomy 28 in Kisavai, the Teichacha. You know, I mean, the admonition, what does it say there? If you don't listen to me, I'm going to destroy you, I'm going to murder you, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to scatter you over the lands. Well, look what happened. Look at this. 1939 came along, we warned everybody, we said everybody that you have to be religious. They weren't religious. God's wrath came down on the world and he destroyed. Now, you ask yourself the question, why? If this is true that God is destroying the bad people, then why children? Why 1.5 million children? So let him go after the people that he actually destroyed, that were bad. Why everybody? So the old comment is, to make an omelet, you got to crack some eggs. Huh? You want to have an omelet? You want to end up with an omelet? You have to break some eggs. Now, what is the egg shuldik? What is the egg responsible? They can't help it, but that's the way it goes. So when God's wrath is unleashed on the world, then there's no asking questions. Then children go, innocent people go, righteous people go. But the whole idea is who causes this? The sinners. Now, this took the form of many different culprits, because some Hasidic rabbis, and I don't want to mention their names, but it wasn't the Lubavitcher Rebbe, let's put it that way. Some Hasidic rabbis blamed it on the rise of Zionism, that said because the Zionist people came about and they were urging and encouraging people to move to Palestine and to establish a state of Israel, and they got the Balfour Declaration passed, it was because of these people that the Holocaust came. There's no ands, if, or buts. That's the way it is. And they quoted from the Talmud in the Tractate Ksubis, page 110, if you want to look it up tonight, that after the destruction of the temple, God made a vow that three things were not going to happen. He swore on the Jewish people that A, that they are never going to forcibly go back to the land of Israel. They're never going to rise up, and go back en masse. Now, if one or two Jews go live in Palestine, who cares? But there's never going to be a mass movement that's going to bring the Jews back until what? Till Mashiach comes. Number two, that the Jews will not rebel against their host nations. So for Jews living in America or in Russia or in France or in Britain or in Spain, they're not going to rebel against them. They're going to sit there quietly until Mashiach comes. Why?
When the horn will go off.
What is it?
That's when the horn will stop.
They don't have no idea who it is? No.
I went to they're having a seminar and I asked the guy to make an announcement. He did.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, JP. Now.
But see, I see that as being a lazier man's view than the first view.
Why?
Because you just say, well,
No, this is a whole theology built around this. It's not so simple. This is God's wrath coming upon you. God's punishment. It makes perfect sense to them because God is an exacting God,
But
and
the world is very narrow looking at it.
Oh, so of course, absolutely very narrow. But this is a way of life to believe in. That you actually believe in this. That you go around day after day believing that there's a quid pro quo. That God in the Torah was not fooling around with you. He does not use words of fancy. But He warned you. This is the warning. God is still all three. He's all knowing and all good. If He's all good, He's like a father. The father knows that sometimes He has to be strict with the kids if they don't listen. This is what God is all about. And unfortunately, sometimes if you have multiple children, if one of them is bad, what happens to the rest? Everybody gets punished. They all get sent to the room, even though one of them may have made the mess. That's the way it goes. So this position is that, and number three, I forgot to mention vow number three. I only mentioned two vows. Vow number one is that the Jews will not forcibly go up to Israel and retake Israel by force. Two is they won't rebel against their host nations. And three, that God promises that the nations that host the Jews will act benevolent towards them. Okay, they'll act benevolent towards them. They won't. So why didn't that happen? Because since we abrogated the first two vows, since Zionism came about and asked the people to please come to Israel, move to Israel, which is a secular Zionistic, atheistic movement, socialist movement that didn't believe in God or the Torah, and drove people away from the Torah. Therefore, God couldn't take it anymore. And in 1939, He let the angel of destruction go and killed 6 million Jews. And we should learn that we have to fight the Zionism tooth and nail, because that has a direct effect today. So if you buy into this, that it's a Zionist, what is the logical conclusion to this position? That you are going to not recognize the state of Israel, you're going to fight against the state of Israel, because as long as Mashiach is not here, it causes every problem. You want a tsunami? You know why tsunami came about? Because Israel is in existence. You want to know why there's war in the world? Because Israel is in existence. Now, we shake our head and we can't believe it for those who don't buy into it. But there are people, thousands of Jews, that buy into this punishment idea because it makes sense to them. It's perfect. In their world, it makes absolute sense because God promised it, and that's the way it happened. And every time that we swerved or strayed from the Torah, God sends us a message. Okay? On the other
When you
opposite,
see them on television, I feel very embarrassed.
that's not only the Natura Carta. You see the Natura Carta because those guys are the. You've seen others. It's of course it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing.
Because we're
It's
talking to
embarrassing.
people who not too many people like, and the least we say that's derogatory, the better off.
But you know what? It's not only us who say it. What about Pat Robertson this week, last week? Now you might excuse him by being an old, guy who's a bit senile, doesn't know what he's talking about. But Pat Robertson has millions of followers. Millions of people believe what Pat Robertson says. And I can guarantee you that in this country, the United States of America, they believe, millions of Americans believe that Sharon got sick because he divided the land of Israel. Because he did not. To me, there's no question. And that's no different than what we're talking about here, right? There's absolutely no difference to this position that God brought this Holocaust upon the people because of a punishment. Now, on the other end of the spectrum came other rabbis that countered the punishment people and said, oh yeah, it was a punishment. But you know why it was a punishment? It was a punishment because the Jews didn't go to Israel. Now, I'm not talking about Zionists. I'm talking about religious Orthodox rabbis who were Zionists. I'm talking about secular Zionists who were Zionists, and they said, you know why they didn't go? Because the Jews laughed at the Zionists, didn't go, and God loves this country more than any country in the whole wide world. And when we had an opportunity in 1917, or in the few years where Britain allowed emigration to Israel, and we stood there in the Galus, because we stood there in the exile, in the diaspora, and we loved it. We loved the diaspora, and then God said, look at this, 2,000 years, 2,000 years I waited for the Jews to be able to go up. And finally I gave them an opportunity. I sent the British over there, and I fought World War I for them, and finally it opened up, and the Jews had an opportunity. Even before the British, while the Ottoman Empire was there, in the late 1800s they had Aliyah, and in the 20s they had Aliyah, and the Jews still refused to go. For every one Jew that went to Palestine, 10 went to America. So God said, I had it. Finished. So because they said, you know what? They said because you didn't go up. So these were super Zionist Orthodox. I'm not talking about secular Orthodox rabbis. So they built up this theology that the Holocaust happened because they did not make Aliyah. That's it. They did not make Aliyah. Now to us, it's not as shocking as the punishment from God, but it's still pretty shocking. I mean, just because they didn't make Aliyah means it's going to kill 6 million innocent people, men, women, and children, and things. But what happened was afterwards, what happened in 1948? Israel was established. So God showed that, you know what, I'm going to push this through whether you like it or not. And this is the way He directed the world to do it, and then that was that, and finished. There's one more position I need to bring up here in Orthodoxy, among Orthodox rabbis. This is a bit of an extreme position, but it is touted by several American rabbis here, because the question is not one of theory. I mean, we're not talking about Purim. How could it happen that Haman was there? And we're not talking about Hanukkah, but we're talking about people who saw this going on. We have pictures, we have documentation. We saw 6 million people die. They came up with this theology. And you have to follow me. Can't fall asleep on this one. Premise A is that God does not force people to do the commandments. He doesn't force you. You do it because you believe that this is the way you're supposed to live life, and that's why you do it. Okay, so far it makes sense, right? God doesn't force you, doesn't twist your arm, it doesn't force you. Premise B is that if God were to punish the people, if let's say God wanted to punish, and I'm not saying that God did punish the people, but if God were to punish the people, what is the worst thing He could possibly do? What? What would He do? He'd cause the Holocaust. Exactly. He would cause the Holocaust. Is there anything that we could think of that could be worse than this? Nothing. There's nothing worse. So if you take these two premises, A, that God does not force you to do the mitzvahs, and B, if He were to punish us, and again, I'm not saying that He did punish us, I'm not taking that position, but if He were to, there's nothing, absolutely nothing worse than the Holocaust, leads us to this conclusion, that the covenant that we had with God at Sinai was unilaterally broken by God at the Holocaust. Unilaterally broken by God at the Holocaust. And the proof is, as you can tell, that after the first temple, the rabbis argued that after the first temple, what happened? There was no more prophecy. No more. We had Jeremiah, we had Isaiah, we had Ezekiel, we had famous Amos, we had many different prophets, great prophets. Jonah, Obadiah, many of them. After the first temple, no more prophecy. After the second temple, no more service. No more temple service, right? After 70, they stopped bringing the sacrifices, right? So we see that there's a pattern in history. Every time God, quote unquote, punishes, although I don't say it's a punishment, whatever, he takes something away, right? It doesn't get better. We don't become more religious. We become less religious. We come further and further away from the covenant. So that's only if your punishment is go to your room. The other punishment is you're going to miss supper. But if you have the ultimate punishment that the parents are going to impose on the children, that your PlayStation is gone forever, that's it. Ice parents. No more parents. There's no more relationship over there. There's no more parental agreement. So this is an extreme position of an Orthodox rabbi. So the conclusion is that now there's no more covenant between the Jews and God. God has unilaterally destroyed and abrogated our covenant, and our job is what they call covenantal. We want to renew the covenant. Renewal. But not the renewal movement that we talk about over here. But this is what is called, basically we want to repair. Covenant repair. That, we do the mitzvahs, not because God is expecting us to do it. God doesn't expect anything from us anymore. And we don't do it. We do it because we want to do it, and we want to repair the covenant between us and God. And that's why we're Orthodox, and that's why we're observant. It was a little radical, because to most Orthodox people, if you say to them, the covenant is broken and there's no more this relationship, and not only that, but the natural extension to this is, what happens to prayer? If there's no more covenant, what happens to prayer? It doesn't listen anymore. It's not listening anymore to our prayers if there's no covenant, because our whole idea was that, we have this relationship at Mount Sinai, Nasiv and Nishma, we will do and we will listen, but if we're not listening and he's not listening, there's nothing more to go. So here you had three separate, unique theological positions from the Orthodox movement. It was either a punishment because Zionism came about, it was a punishment because there was not enough Zionism, and Jews rejected God's plea, and he was actually begging us to go back to Palestine, and we refused, so God sent his wrath against us, or whatever he did to us. And number 3 is that the covenant was completely broken. And since the covenant is broken, therefore, now we're just into repair. We're in a repair mode. And ultimately, when will the repair take place? When Mashiach comes.
Because we can't prepare, we're not all powerful.
Yeah, we're not all powerful, but what we can do is we could somehow, appeal to God. Appeal to him to come back. Come back again. To come back again. But it's an extreme position that not many rabbis, but you're in a corner. You don't know what to do. You're swinging in the dark here. Because God has not come down and he says to us, hey, you know what? Look, I want to explain to you what I did. It's not that kind of a relationship we have with him. Unfortunately, we're human beings. We're limited in our scope and our understanding, and we're grappling with this as we never grappled with any position beforehand. We never had to deal with something like this. We had Kishinev pogroms in 1903, and we had other pogroms in Russia in 1880, and we had pogroms in Poland, and we had anti-Semitism, but we never had something like this, where a third of all Jewry was systematically driven and exterminated by Nazis. We never had anything. So we're trying to come to grips with something. Mom, go ahead, please.
Underlying all 3 of them is that it was still the fault of the Jews.
Well, except in position number 3. Position number 3, where they say that the covenant was broken by God, not by the Jews. God had broken.
If the Jews had done what they were supposed to do, the covenant wouldn't have been broken.
No, the Jews did what they were supposed to do. God by himself, unilaterally. He did. The position number 3 is it's not the Jews' fault. God, for some odd reason, unilaterally broke the covenant with us, and that's the way we would do. So once he breaks the covenant, then there's no reason to follow along. This is going to be extended later on by non-Orthodox rabbis, as we're going to see, because they take it even one step further in saying, but in position number 3, if you want to buy into it, I'm not saying you should or shouldn't or not, it's a radical Orthodox, it's a very narrow bridge that you walk on.
Who are they?
This is modern Orthodox rabbis, certain modern Orthodox Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg from an organization called CLAL, C-L-A-C. You know, CLAL, it's rabbis in New York, modern Orthodox rabbis that walk a very, 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 very fine and narrow, and he gets a lot of criticism, you can well imagine, because the very basis of our relationship with God is the covenant, the bris that he formed at Mount Sinai, and here Greenberg is just basically destroying the entire underpinnings of what it is. But to him, he can't see it any other way. There's no way that he can justify our definition of God, which he believes in as well, right? He believes in all good God. So if it's an all good God and there's 6 million dead people, to me there's a discrepancy over here. It's incongruent that these two things should happen together. So something has to give. So what happened was, for some reason, God, down the line, we kept going down the line, and God finally ended this by taking away the most important thing in our relationship, and that is basically the covenant. Now, I'm not saying don't be Orthodox. Be Orthodox. You should, David, and you should, because what we're into now is Tikkun Olam. We're into repairing the world. We're into Tikkun Brit. Now we're into repairing. We're repairing the covenant, and hopefully when Mashiach comes, everything is going to be hunky dory once again. Now, again, I'm not here to any of these positions. I'm not going to base my life on, and I'm not going to buy 100%. But I just want to throw them out to you, so at least you have an understanding of where certain people are coming from because of the enormity. I mean, again, this is a challenge that we've never been challenged before. I mean, and it's easy to just, go into the corner and not think about it, but I think it's important for us to discuss it and to talk about it and to argue about it. I'm talking about religious Zionists, but extreme religious Zionists, not Rav Kook. See, Rav Kook, basically, he was the epitome, or he was the poster boy for religious Zionism. He rejected this opinion of a punishment altogether. But there were others within this religious Zionist milieu that believed it otherwise. Well, why would it happen? Why? I mean, and to me, it makes, maybe possibly. I mean, here's an opportunity. We're begging you to come. God has basically set up the platter for you. It's like the story of the guy who's in a flood, and and he goes on the roof and he says, "God, please help me." And and a boat comes by and says, "Get on the boat now, God will save me." And then the plane flies by and throws him down the ladder, and he says, "No, God will save me." And then he drowns. He goes up to heaven and where? Why did you save me? Why did you save me? He says to God. So God, who sent the boat? Who sent the plane? Who sent everything? I sent it. Now you didn't listen to me, and you stood on top of the house and thought to yourself that you're going to be saved. Whose fault is that? And this is their kind of position. That God already sent the remedy before. He was already going to unleash Hitler on Europe. God had a plan to unleash Hitler on Europe. So before unleashing Hitler on Europe, he decided, what he's going to do? He's going to have first the Zionists go to Israel. They're going to start building a country. They're going to build Tel Aviv, and they're going to build Yaffo, and they're going to build Haifa. And they're going to build all of these things. So now you already have a safe haven, even though it wasn't Israel. Okay, so people can argue, but it wasn't Israel. It was Palestine, and they passed a white paper. And then in 1939, just before the war, I had read to you last time, I think, during our Churchill discussions, the speech that he gave, in September of 1939, how he was so much against passing the thing was called not the Fairfield. There was a name for the white paper at that time, where they stopped emigration to Israel. But before then, there were pockets of times when people could go. So why didn't you go? Okay. Now again, I'm not. You have to listen. You're intelligent people. I'm just presenting the case to you. Tonight you'll go home. You'll digest everything that was said here this evening. Then you'll make a decision on where you want to go. But at least tomorrow, we'll put on tefillin. Okay. That's the main thing. After everything is said and done, you still got to put on tefillin, no matter which position you're going to take here, because it even gets more interesting. I mean, this is already mainline orthodoxy. What do you expect the Orthodox to say? This is mainline orthodoxy. Position number 3, we only got to position number 3, is basically what theologians call an eclipse of God. Sometimes within history, inexplicably, God disappears. Now, that does not change at all the definition of God. God is still omnipotent, and God is still all-knowing, and God is still all good, all of these things. But for some odd reason, within history, if you study history, there are certain periods of blackouts. Like a blackout, an eclipse of where God somehow disappears. And this is one of those times. Why it happens, we don't know. But it's a pattern that follows time after time after time after time again.
Maybe it has people up in other universes.
There could be that you could speculate about this position a million different ways. Basically, this is a position that has a ceiling to it. It's eclipse. We see eclipses here in the universe. You know, we see sometimes the sun disappears. Is the sun gone? No. The moon is eclipsed. Is the moon gone? No. I mean, a high guy hides behind a tree. Is he gone? No. So the same thing. This is all a reflection of what God does from time to time. Now, it could be he does this to clean the world. It could be he does this for but they don't want to take a position on not punishment because they don't believe in that. They don't believe God punishes the people. They're not going to take a position that God doesn't exist because he does exist. He exists exactly the same way he existed all the time. And then all of a sudden he reappears. In 1945, God took a vacation. In 39, he took a vacation. In 45, he reappeared again. And then look at 48, Israel was created. So you see, so God must have been around because he just, 3 years before then, 6 million were killed. And now all of a sudden the state of Israel so God is here. So he reappeared and unfortunately, this is the recurrence of history. And there's not much you can do because it could probably happen again.
Was that an Orthodox position?
No, I don't think this was an Orthodox position. This was just a general philosophical position. The eclipse of God. I don't think that any specific Orthodox rabbi took this position. It was just a general philosophical, different scholars took this. Position number 4. See? If you take a dollar bill out of your pocket, read the bottom of it. What does it say? Okay. There are people here in this country that fight against this. Want to get rid of in God we trust. Not so much because they don't believe in God. But we call those people are atheists. Now, I'm going to present 2 positions. Position number 4 and position number 5 are kind of similar, but not similar. Position number 4 basically states that we've been fooled all along. You've been fooled all along. There never was, there never is, and there never will be a God. So the whole question of where is God makes no sense whatsoever. And here's another proof in the pudding. This is proof in the pudding. That if you think that there's somehow a supernatural force up there that's happened to be controlling or looking or guiding or doing or seeing, you know what? You're wrong. There's absolutely no God. There never was a God and there never will be a God. And here again, they use the Holocaust as perfect proof. Now, believe me, there are times when everybody's in a weak moment and wants to believe this because it's somehow easier to believe, although ultimately as people of faith we reject this position of atheism because even in the world you still need some kind of, I believe, order. With atheism, if everybody would be an atheist, it would be complete anarchy. I believe total anarchy because people wouldn't respect your rights. I mean, it would be, at least now we have somewhat fear of God, somewhat fear of, whether you're a Christian or you're a Muslim or you're Jewish. If you have a fear of God, it's kind of constrain you a little bit. Once atheism takes over, it's not going to be an atheist like, going to be a very intelligent atheist. Sure, of course, who's an example? If you take Dennis Diderot, for example, the encyclopedists. Like, sure, they were very refined, good people, nice people. But most people, if they're atheists, if there's going to be no fear of God, the whole world is going to go kaput. That's my opinion. But for this discussion tonight, just let it be known that they took a very strong position. I mean, and don't think that their position didn't gain strength after World War II. I mean, think about it. I mean, here it is. We're here sitting and we're banging our heads together trying to figure out exactly how we're going to put a round peg in a square. And we're thinking, how can we do this and how we put it like this and go like that and try to trick God and try to define him in all different ways and say he's milchik, no, he's fleshik, he's pariv, and this and that, he's pesach dike milchik, all different ways of trying to define God. They have a very simple position. No, I have no theological problems because there's no such thing as theology. There's no God, there's no nothing. Have a good day, sei gesund, and don't hurt yourself on the way out. Okay? Position number 5 doesn't go as radical as that, but in a sense more radical. This position was broached in a book called After Auschwitz by this fellow's name down. Give me 1 second. Richard Rubinstein. Richard Rubinstein was a conservative rabbi that wrote what they called radical Holocaust theology. If you read After Auschwitz, which I read a while ago, but I just recently brushed up again on it, basically says like this. What did Nietzsche say? The famous statement about God?
God is
God is dead. Correct? He writes in his book, just to summarize it, we Jews don't need to be told that God is dead. Because God was not dead. We just live in an era of God's dying. God's dying. We live in an era where God died. Meaning that God was around. He created the world and he had a plan. He did all of these things. But after Auschwitz, he was dead. God is dead. So this differs than traditional atheism in the fact that atheists say there was never a God. Rubinstein et al., others like him in this radical theology, basically say God died. Go to Auschwitz, go to the ovens, take a look into the ovens, and you know who you'll find there? God. He was burnt together with the 6 million Jews. So if he had a plan, if he had some idea of what he was doing, right now it's dead. It's over, it's finished, Kamarno. There's nothing to worry about. Go do whatever you like. Don't feel guilty, eat ham, because there's no ramifications. There's no plan, there's nothing to talk about. This is called after Auschwitz. Radical Holocaust theology. We live in a time where basically it's not relevant anymore. God is not relevant to humanity. There's no reason to talk about him. There's no reason to discuss him because he's gone. Now, Rubinstein wrote this in the 60s. And it was it caught the Jewish world by storm because it talked, you remember in the 60s, I was a little kind of young in the 60s, I wasn't a big radical theologian, but it basically talked to that kind of a generation, where, you don't have to worry, you don't have to feel guilty, let go of certain things. And this is basically what God is dead theology really means, that, you don't have to worry, he's irrelevant. Don't sit there day after day pondering and hurting yourself and beating yourself up because somehow you want to fit in this idea of what God is like. Don't worry about it. God is dead. Live life. But as he got older, Richard Rubinstein, as he got older, he began to change. Because you know what? Ultimately, if there is no direction, if Jews don't have some kind of a force that is going to keep them going, what keeps us together? Nothing. If I tell you today, listen, we're all bound here by being Jews, but we're all fooled. We're all fooled. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as Judaism. There's no such thing as a Torah. It means nothing. It never meant anything. And certainly now after the Holocaust, it's very hot when I talk about Rubinstein. And all of that stuff, it means nothing. So what binds us together? What brings us together? Nothing. There's no reason to sit it together. We all go in a different way, and it shatters everything that we believed in. So it was too radical, his theology, and slowly but surely he started to come back to mainstream. And even I think in the 80s, he started to write some articles about the Kabbalistic interpretations of God, because that he found solace, not so much in traditional theology, but in Kabbalistic ideas of mysticism and all of that. There was a rabbi by the name of Eliezer Berkowitz. Eliezer Berkowitz wrote a book that was called basically Faith After the Holocaust. Of course, that's what he named the class after his book. It was called Faith After the Holocaust. And he basically puts down the Orthodox mainstream position in his book. He was a modern Orthodox rabbi, lived in Chicago for many years. His name, Eliezer Berkowitz's name, wrote many books. But he wrote this book called Faith After the Holocaust, in which he says like this: God does not change. God is still omnipotent, he's all-knowing, and he's all-powerful. But he allows people free will. Free will exists in the world. And the fact is that he does not intervene. And as much as he wants to, and as much as he can, and as much as it hurts him, and he stands up there and he bleeds and he cries and he hurts with the people, he allows the world to run naturally. And sometimes when we run naturally, it's going to hurt. Because people have two sides to them. They have the good side and they have the evil side. And when the evil takes over, people hurt each other. And this not only happens during the Holocaust, but this happens every single day. People beat each other up, people steal from each other, people murder each other, people are cruel, whether it's what you say or how you act to them, how you betray them. They're liars, they're cheats, they're scoundrels, they're bullies, they're hoodlums. They have free choice. This is why the world was created. Why did God create the world? Because he wanted people to recognize that there is a God. He wanted them to know that they could rise above their pettiness. He wanted them to be able to soar like eagles. He wanted them to be good people. So he gave within their heart, he gave them a Yetzer Tov. He gave them a good inclination. That this good inclination tells them to be good people and to be studious and be thrifty and be conscientious and work hard and be honest. Don't tell lies. All the good things, all the good traits that we somehow define a person by. That's everything that this inclination says. But if he did that and didn't give us the other, what would we be? Angels. We'd be angels soaring in the world, right? He didn't want to create angels. He wanted to give us a challenge. He gave us a test. So within that, he gave us the evil inclination. And the evil inclination beats in everybody's heart. And that says to us, no, come on. Oh, yeah, I love Marvin's shirt. When he's not looking, I'm going to steal it. I love his pen. I love this. I love that. I want to grab it. I just want a self-gratification and just self-accumulation. Everything for me. So when you're an individual little chazer, so you only have effect over your little area. But if you're a Hitler and you're pure evil, then you have an effect on the entire world. And as much as God wants to intervene, as much as God wants to do that, he will not, because he allows people free choice. Now that doesn't mean that he's not going to intervene at all within the world. Sure, that's why we have miracles. So God saves this person, God saves that person. But in the overall scheme of things, God is not going to change the course of nature. He's not going to stop the Romans from burning down the temple, and he's not going to stop the Spanish from chasing us out. We are the recipients of all of these calamities because there is anti-Semitism in the world and people have free choice. So when Hitler goes up to heaven or to hell and he faces God and God says to him, why do you do it? And he's going to say, what do you want? You wanted me to do it. You had destined 6 million. God said, I didn't want you to do it. I could have found my own way to do it. Who asked you to intervene in my business? So Hitler's going to go to hell and stay in hell, for eternity. And this is how we justify it. This is how we look at this. It's not pretty and it's not easy to understand and it's hard, but I would say that this is probably the closest of any position that we have that's both theological and orthodox. That, there is a God, we define God, we understand the problems that this ideology confronts us with, but ultimately this is the way that Berkowitz put it down. And I urge everyone, by the way, to buy the book. It's called Faith After the Holocaust by Eliezer Berkowitz. You can buy it for $3.50 on Amazon.
The problem I have with that is you say that God doesn't want to intervene. We've got free choice, free will. But then yet again, there are examples where he does intervene.
Right. But not to change the course of history. Not in the big picture.
How do you define the course of history?
Like a stopping of a Holocaust or something like that, or stopping.
That just sounds very convenient. Why would he intervene in an individual case? Because
this is his purview. And in this theology, this is his purview where he wants to pick this guy and not that guy, this guy, not that guy, and then the theology based around this is that it reflects a Holocaust does not reflect badly on God. It reflects badly on humanity. It turns the question around and shines the spotlight on us, not on him, because he allows history to go. He created the world. He allows history to go, and every once in a while, the way he wants to see it is he kind of picks this and picks that and picks this, but will not, in the big scheme of things, or at least historically in the big scheme of things, will not intervene and try to change history.
Why does he dabble then?
Why does he dabble? Because he can. Because he can.
But he can also change the course.
He can, but he won't. But he won't. Yes, he can. That's right. You're exactly right.
So
yes,
he'll save one person, but not $6 million.
That's right. That's right. He will save one, but he won't save 6 million. Because ultimately he says history has to take its course. People have to be able to exercise their free will. And if I come down every single time to save humanity from itself, game is over. Game is over. Now again, is there problems with it? Of course there's problems, because any time that you define God as being able to and he doesn't, it's like a guy watching someone drown and going like this.
It's easier for me to accept that he doesn't intervene at all.
That he doesn't intervene or can't intervene.
No, that he chooses not to intervene.
Well, then you have to explain how miracles happen. How some guy, you know, well, chances. See, chances. We cannot buy chance, because Maimonides clearly writes. I mean, this is basically that things happen in the world for a purpose. It's not the 6 million was there for a purpose. We have to learn a lesson. What is the lesson? I don't know. We can talk about it from today to kingdom come. Nothing happens by chance in the world. So you're walking on a very, very fine theological tightrope over here. Because on one hand, like Bob says, he can, and he sometimes does. So why doesn't he work on the big picture, on the big thing? And another thing, if we describe God, think about it, if we describe God as having all powerful and all knowing and all of these things, so beforehand he knows everything. So how is there really free will? If he knows, then how do we? Okay, so that itself needs an entire class in of itself to explain how you can justify these two seemingly contradictory philosophical positions, is predestination and free will. But leave it as it may, trust me, somehow they figured it out that there is free will, otherwise it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. If there's no free will where I can, if I want to, go across the street to the In-N-Out Burger and sit down with a double bacon, with the ganze Geschäft, with a milkshake, and if I can't do that, then forget about it. It doesn't make any sense. It has to be where I'm able to, but I choose not to because I want to fulfill some kind of covenantal agreement with God. It has to be that way, because otherwise it makes no sense whatsoever, and we're not angels. We're not angels, so therefore in this position itself, he's basically arguing that, you know what? If there's a problem in the world, it's man's problem. God is sitting upstairs.
How do you define quantitatively what becomes the natural course of events?
That's an excellent question. I don't know. Where
does it stop? Is it, if you say it's not one, is it 2, 3, 4?
I don't know. And is it not? Is it not when he puts together in one room Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and John Hancock, and they change the course of human events? Is it not God in his providential guidance putting these men together and seeing them? What if Thomas Jefferson would have died in childbirth? Who knows what would happen? What if Paul Revere's horse dies, breaks a leg, like in the Kentucky Derby or something? What happens? Believe me, there's a million questions to this. There's a million questions that we can ask about this position. But with everything said and done, with all of the questions back and forth, if you want to believe, I'm saying if, the big question is if you want to believe, A, that God still can be described with the three big picture, knowing, power, and goodness, and at the same time believe that the Torah was given to us as basically a guide to live life with free will. That means if a Jew doesn't want to do it, the Jew can reject it, and that's up to him. Then this is the position that they want to take. We'll start with Dr. Khan.
Free will.
Yes.
But then in the Torah it says behind the klala.
Right.
So the klala is that you have free will to do right.
Right.
You also have free will to do wrong, but you'll get punished.
Okay,
Free
so
will.
that's where they stop. That's where Eliezer Berkowitz says, stop. I don't want to go there into the punishments, because there's no quid pro quo. There's no, like, you look in the world and you see, okay, in that case, a bad person should get punished. A good person shouldn't get punished.
But what is bad?
What? No, you're saying,
Exactly.
in the Torah it says, choose life. What is life? Life is keeping the Torah. Life is living your life according to good deeds. Keeping kosher, keeping Shabbos, not eating chametz on Pesach, doing all of these things, having a circumcision, doing that, that's life. To God, to a Jew, that's life. And if you reject life, what do you choose? You choose death. But the position is not that we are going to be the ones that are arbiters, like the position number one, when we say, hey, you know what? They didn't do it, so a punishment came upon them. It's free will. There's going to be Hitler. Hitler is going to come into the world. He's going to destroy. It happened to be Jews. Yes, there was probably a reason for it, why there was Jews, whatever. But it could have been the Turks to the Armenians. It could be the Tutsi to the Hutus. It could be the Potpal to the Cambodians. It could be name an era. We'll name a genocide. Okay, you can name anything. Darfur today in the Sudan. These are bad people, bad, and God chooses to allow the world to run. Look, Cain and Abel. Now, God could have intervened at the first moment there. 25% of the world, he could have held Cain's hand. He could have said, Cain, come on. Because he had that kind of relationship with them, didn't he? Right? He chased him around in the Garden of Eden. He wasn't shy then. And then he came to visit Cain a number of times. So he could have just held Cain's hand and said, what are you doing? Take it easy, relax, calm down, have a beer, But he didn't. He allowed Cain to actually go and murder Abel. Now, why did he allow him to do that? Why? Because if you read in the first part of Genesis, he clearly states his position on the world. He says clearly, openly, I think one of the most important passages of the entire Bible is you should just know that sin crouches at your door. Crouches at your door. And if you allow it to come in, it's going to overwhelm you. But you have the strength to overcome it. And that's been the position all the while. That people do bad things to people because they're weak and because they're evil. And that's the way you explain the Holocaust. Go ahead, Susanna, and then we'll go to...
Okay, so in Purim, wouldn't that have been a Holocaust? So Queen Esther happened to be in a key position, which seems like a plan that was perhaps made ahead of time, and wouldn't that have been some kind of definition of Holocaust? If the original plan had been executed, all the Jews I understand were in the Persian Empire in the world.
Certainly many of them, if not most of them, were around.
So
sometimes he intervenes.
So
sometimes he intervenes. I mean, this is here's just, we passed Hanukkah, right? We celebrated 8 days of Hanukkah. Why do we celebrate 8 days of Hanukkah? Because God allowed the oil to last for 8 days. Right? It was going to last for 1 day, it lasted for 8 days. Or Judah Maccabee was one guy killed 1,000 Syrian soldiers. Okay, sure. So the proof is that what God does sometimes intervene in history, which we admitted that he does intervene. And sometimes he plays the cards where Esther ends up in the king's palace, even though she looked green. She was a green-looking girl and not pretty at all, according to the Talmud. But somehow she found favor in Achashverosh's eyes. Yeah, that's going to happen sometimes. But by and large, God is going to let this world run. So sometimes he chooses and sometimes he doesn't choose. But this is the price we pay. We pay a very dear price for having free will. That's what we do.
To me, Judaism came about because, God said we have two types of, we have a good part and a bad part, and he wants us to learn self-discipline. And that's what all the mitzvahs, to help us appreciate.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. That's exactly. Since we have this natural tendency to rebel, we're going to fight as much as we possibly can not to do the good, because by nature we want to just self-absorb and do whatever we can grab and, do all of that stuff. That's why the mitzvahs came about.
And by self-discipline, we like ourselves better.
That's what, yeah.
Maybe we'll be nicer.
That's exactly what the position is. That's part of it, to help us overcome all of our tendencies. And here the problem is not with God, because God, God lets it run on its own and have a good day. But there's not absence. He's not an absolutely landlord. That's part of this position. He's not left. We're not finished yet. We're only on position number 7, where we have to get to another 3 or 4 positions. We haven't finished yet. But in this position, God is around, lets people run the way they wanted to run. Every once in a while, he does stick his hand into it, like 6-Day War or something like that, even though it could be explained in many different ways. But nonetheless, this is the way it is, and that's the price we pay for God giving us free choice. We're going to come up with animals like Hitler and Stalin.
Is that your position?
I buy into this position. I believe that. I believe that we do have free will, and God does allow the world to run on its own, and that we have a tremendous responsibility as human beings to be very vigilant at what happens, not to fall back in the position God will help us, but that if we see Osama bin Laden, we take him out immediately without asking questions. No doubt about that, because otherwise we're going to be sitting there wondering, why did we allow Osama bin Laden to exist? God could have helped us. So I do absolutely believe in free will, and I absolutely believe in God is omnipotent, in all, in the world. So I'm basically buy into this position where this is the price we pay for being humans. We're human beings, and we're going to do this. Now, we pray to God for Him to intervene. I do believe in the power of prayer, that, if someone is sick and then we pray to Hashem, and, sometimes He answers, sometimes He doesn't answer, but we're just small, and my arm is too short to box with God, as we say. But to me, that's the most comfortable position. I can have my cake and eat it as well. I have free choice, but He's around. Sometimes He answers, sometimes. Now, do I get angry with God? Yes, who doesn't get angry with God? Not always does He answer correctly. I keep buying a lottery ticket. He hasn't answered me yet, and I'm very, very upset with Him. And I'm very angry with Him. I bought in California, and I bought in Florida, and they still haven't won. So I'm trying all different places, but He still hasn't answered me. But that kind of shows who. Sometimes you get angry with God, and everybody has what we call a riffian. We have a very, very, very weak feeling of faith. We have a faith tester. You see a child is sick, God forbid, and you see, and the child passes away. It just wants to eat you up, and you're standing at the funeral, and your hand is like, that's got just a couple of days ago, just to give you more example, because obviously this is the position that we're going to elaborate most upon, because it's most closest to home, is that, for 2 days, Sunday, Monday, we had what we called the regional kinnis, ashluchim. All of the Chabad rabbis in California, Nevada, met here in Long Beach. About close to 200 of them and all Sunday, and yesterday morning at the Hebrew Academy. Bob came by yesterday and saw them, how they were diligently working and talking about fundraising efforts. So be careful, because now the rabbis know how to fundraise. They'll be calling you very shortly on all the good ideas. But you know what? So one of the rabbis got up. He just recently lost a baby after 3 months. I mean, the baby was 1 month old. It was a healthy baby born, and then all of a sudden the whole system shut down. And for 2 new months they kept the baby alive, and they were praying, and everybody was going down there. All the rabbis sending petitions to the Rebbe, to God, to anybody you could think of, everybody. And unfortunately, the baby passed away. Okay, the baby passed away. So he told a story that while he was in the hospital, he was in intensive care, the baby, for 3 months, and every day rabbis would come to visit. He's a rabbi down in San Diego, a young guy, beautiful guy, I'd never met him before. Just recently had a chance to speak in San Diego. He was there. So he was telling the story that one time, it was one of these Lubavitcher holidays. I mean, it was either the Rebbe's birthday or the father-in-law's birthday. One of these holidays. So a bunch of rabbis came to be with him, give him some moral support in the hospital. So they brought some mashka, and they brought some booze into the hospital, and they were some cake and some other kind of stuff. And they were all, talking to him and giving him encouragement and telling him, listen, you know what, this is a test, but you're going to come over the test, and it's you're going to, whatever's going to happen, you're going to, whatever. And one guy said, you know what? I want to say something. The room got quiet, and he said, you know what? This is a test, and we should tell God we're not interested in the test. We don't want the test. Give the test to somebody else. We're not interested in the test. We don't want to pass the test, because each test, what does it do for you? It makes you stronger, right? I mean, if you're tested, it makes you stronger. It's like steel going through a fire. How do you get steel? You have to put it through fire. Same way. This guy was saying, we don't want the test. Keep the test. We want the baby. Well, unfortunately, the baby had passed away. But that resonated with him. I mean, that kind of a thing that we don't want. Don't give us anything. Don't give us a test. Keep the baby healthy. But that's not in our purview. Ultimately, these things happen, and whatever. All right. So we'll come back to this. We'll revisit this position. So if there's any other questions concerning this, what we call the faith after the Holocaust, the Orthodox position, pretty much. I mean, there's always going to be somebody who's going to add a little here, a little thought there, back and forth. But there was a professor.
How long has he been dead, Berkowitz?
He couldn't have died that long, because the book was published in the 70s. So he might have died in the 90s, maybe. Yeah, he was born, I think, in around the 20s, maybe, and something like that. But he wrote many books. There was a professor who was a professor of philosophy at the University of Toronto, a Holocaust survivor, Emil Fackenheim, and we've talked about him a number of times here in the class, who came with wasn't a very observant Jew, probably was not observant at all, but he came up with an idea that this was somehow a revelation from God, that this was somehow God was sending us a message, a tough message, But his idea was that what he called, this is the Jewish affirmation for survival. And it's a revelation that our reaction after the Holocaust has to be that we have to completely reaffirm our Judaism. And he said, I want to now establish the 614th commandment. And the 614th commandment is, thou shalt not give Hitler a posthumous victory. Every time a Jew falls away, every time a Jew has doubts, every time a Jew gives up on Judaism, it is giving Hitler a victory. And this was his philosophy. He said, this is what God intended us to do. Whatever the reason is for the Holocaust, it was an affirmation, it was a revelation from God, and our only reaction should be from the Holocaust is to once again reaffirm our commitment to God. Because if we don't, he wins. And to him, that was the worst. To him, that was absolutely the worst things. So it doesn't matter if you put on tefillin, it doesn't matter if you don't put on tefillin, it doesn't matter if you're observant. You have to walk around with pride in your heart, and you have to affirm that we believe in the Jewish people, and that we have to believe in the Jewish cause, and we have to believe in the land of Israel, and that's the way it is.
So he did believe in God.
Oh yeah, he definitely believed in God. He was an atheist. He was an atheist. He believed in God, but his position was not so much that he was trying to figure God and put him into this how God, what God. This was a revelation. Just like a revelation at Sinai, this was another new revelation that came into the world, and our responsibility, as he called it, was against the affirmation for survival. That's what we have to do. That's the way we have to look at it, and everything else that falls apart doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference. There are those that view this as a complete mystery beyond comprehension. This is a position, not like the first position I talked about, that don't care. That, you know what, it doesn't make a difference. God was, God is, God will be. You know what, Holocaust come, Holocaust go. C'est la vie. As basically, God doesn't change my opinion of God. This position is a little bit different. And I think this also comes into play with my position vis-a-vis with Berkowitz's in Faith After the Holocaust. And basically, that the Holocaust is a mystery beyond our understanding. It may have a meaning, like Emil Fackenheim says, to reaffirm, Judaism, or don't let Judaism die. It may have a purpose, but whatever purpose, it's beyond our understanding. It's basically we don't know. I'm not God's lawyer, and I think that if you take both positions, and I believe in this as well, that there probably is a reason for the Holocaust, but we're not going to know the reason for the Holocaust. There's no way. And we are not God's lawyers here on earth. That's not our position. Our position is to do whatever. Now, on this one, this position, number 8, I want to quote a letter from the Rabbi to Elie Wiesel. Elie Wiesel, as we all know, won the Nobel Prize for peace. He's been fighting, for humanity. I mean, again, wars against civilizations, against mankind. Mr. Holocaust. Okay. After the war, Elie Wiesel sent a letter. The Rebbe sent him, I think, at the first letter, basically saying that I want you to get married. You're a young guy. You got to get married. Wiesel responded by saying, I'm not getting married. There's no reason to. I came from the horrors of the Holocaust. There's absolutely no reason. I don't want to get married. There's nothing to talk about. What's the purpose of getting married? There's nothing to it. The Rebbe then writes him a letter. I'm not going to read the whole letter because it's like 5 pages long in Yiddish. By the time I finish, I'll be asleep and so will you. Okay? But he tells him like this. For a long time we haven't corresponded. This letter actually wrote 1968. Around this time, actually, 3rd day of Tavis, 1968. So it was the winter, probably the winter of 67. Probably maybe just January of 68. And he says to him, listen, I don't know if you got married or if you didn't get married, because I haven't heard from you for a long time. And I wanted to see you. He doesn't matter for bringing, Rebbe's gathering, I didn't see you. You haven't been around, so I want to reiterate to you that every time since you fight against Hitler, you have to make sure that to beat Hitler is only one way, and that is by perpetuating the Jewish people. It's the only way to beat Hitler. Although that everything that happened in the Holocaust we're not going to understand. So the Rebbe is agreeing somewhat with position number 8 as well as position number 7, because every time a Jew falls away, what happens? It's a victory, it's a posthumous victory for Hitler. The Rebbe says that's going to be the affirmation that you are going to overcome, he says, your pessimistic outlook on the world and allow for a brighter Jewish future. Now, I'm very, summarize this very quickly, but that's what 5 pages he's telling him to do. That by doing this and affirming that you believe in the eternity of the Jewish people, and no matter what happens to them, there's always going to be a bright future, and I'm going to be part of that future, you drive another nail in Hitler's coffin. But the moment you allow him to get the better of you, and what about the Holocaust? We don't have to answer every question. The Rebbe often said, I'm not God's lawyer here on earth. Well, I have to explain everything. When God shows up at Mashiach, he'll explain everything. So the Rebbe really takes a combination of 3 positions on this letter. One, I firmly believe he agrees with Berkowitz of free will, and that's the way it is, and we have to overcome, as he's telling Wiesel, because Wiesel has free choice if he wants to get married or not. So in position number 1, he believes in free choice. You have to. Position number 2, you want to kill Hitler. Your whole life is dedicated now to destroying Hitler. So what are you doing? By not getting married, you're not giving an opportunity for children to be born and educate them. So there's position number 7. And position number 8 is a combination, as we're not going to understand everything. As much as you're going to think, Wiesel, that you're the brightest guy in the entire world and going to know every single position, there's certain things that we're not going to know. Wiesel ultimately got married. I think he has 1 son. And this son, hopefully will get married, have other children, will save a whole lineage, of people. But just so we know that God's definition does not change. What changes is our limitations in knowing God's plan. My thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways, says the Lord, so be it. This is what he wanted, this is what it does, but we don't question. Ours is not to question why, ours is but to go on. That's it, right? Ours is but to go on.
Just to add to it, that it's a very well-known fact and documented that after the Holocaust, after the survivors, one of the first things that young people did was to get married.
Yes, that is
with
true.
people that they didn't even know much about each other, didn't know if they love each other or not. They just got married to defy Hitler.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Because they wanted to just show that life goes on. Life becomes normal. Life is normal, and that's what people like my parents, Kenny's parents.
They met here in Los Angeles.
But they still got married.
Yeah, but it was 10 years after the Holocaust. But Uncle Eugene introduced them. They were both survivors.
Survivors. Yeah.
My father married my mother
Right after the war. So the many people that got married right afterwards were coming out of the hell. They got married to try to reestablish once again, without a theological underpinning. I mean, we're not talking about people who believe, okay, you know what? But we're going to show that from these ashes we're going to rebuild. That's what a Jewish survival is.
They needed family connections too.
You needed something.
I mean,
You
they
needed,
were alone.
yeah,
They were
absolutely.
down in camps alone.
Absolutely.
Sick and almost dead, so.
Almost.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We're trying to analyze God in human terms, and that's the problem. It's different. The soul survives, right, through eternity. Is that the way I understand to be correct? So the body, the skeleton and all, but the soul. My father's soul is still around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that is true. That's something. But we're just trying to figure out here different reactions to what's going on over here. I mean, so to some of us, we feel comfortable in taking Berkowitz's position, and saying, I'm going to walk this fine line of free choice versus predestination. Some guys will take Yitz Greenberg's position. Not that he did. I don't think he denies free choice, but the whole covenant business is to him history. Or you could take you could take Rubinstein's position that God is dead and then that's it. And there's a lot of Jews did that. A lot of Jews after World War II, as many people that got married, assimilated quickly into society, didn't want to have to do with Judaism anymore. Changed their name, changed their profession, did everything as long, didn't bring up their children as Jews because who needed it? I mean, I'll never forget. I'll never forget this. As long we're talking about this, as long as I live. 1970, I went to Israel with my mother. We took this little tour on an Egged bus. I was 14 years old. On this tour was a Polish Holocaust survivor with his Christian blonde son. He had stayed in Germany after the war and married this German woman, and he had this son, and he was bringing him to Israel. He was also my age, 14, and my mother was not a fighter, but she one day just laced into this guy like there was no tomorrow, like how could you dare stay in a country that's full of our blood, the blood of our people, and all of, I don't even know why I'm bringing this up. That must have been something that you said, Pierre, that God got me off on this reaction that, and she's just screaming at him, why he did that, to do that, because to them it was, there's another victory to Hitler. You look at you married a German woman, a blonde German woman, you have a German son, an Aryan son. It was like, like the worst possible thing that could possibly happen. But you know what, so many people, I know I said that, because many people took Rubinstein position, the death of God, and then what's the difference? If God is dead, is the difference if you marry Malka or you marry Maria? There's no difference. Malka, Maria is the same thing. There's no difference. Mary, all of that stuff. So you have to find home. You have to find your heart. Has to be somewhere. Of course, as an Orthodox rabbi, I would love you to start thinking about more. What was it called? Observance. Yeah, that's the word. I mean, more observance and more mitzvahs, to keep the Jewish people going. Obviously, I love what Fackenham says, and I love what the Rebbe says, and I love what Berkowitz says. I'm not so sure if I love what Rubinstein says, although I wouldn't condemn anybody so fast. But here's another radical position. Listen to this one. And this was not an Orthodox rabbi. This was a Reform rabbi, Rabbi Maybaum, that came up with this position. I'm going to read something from you. You're going to tell me where I'm quoting from, okay? For the biblical scholars there outside in the crowd. Okay? Someone's going to know. Who would believe what we have heard? For whom has the arm of Hashem been revealed? Formerly he grew like a sapling, or like a root from the ground. He had neither form nor grandeur. We saw him, but without such visage that we could desire him. He was despised and isolated from men, a man of pains and accustomed to illness, and one from whom we would hide our faces. He was despised, and we had no regards to him. But in truth, it was our ills that he bore, and our pains that he came, that we had regarded him diseased, stricken by God, and afflicted. He was pained because of our rebellious sins, and oppressed through our iniquities. The chastisement upon him was for our benefit, and through his wounds we were healed. We have all strayed like sheep, each in his own way, and Hashem afflicted upon him the iniquity of us all. What am I quoting from?
New Testament.
Almost the New Testament. Does it sound like the New Testament? Where am I quoting from?
Slow-mo or David, right?
Where's that?
It's slow-mo or David, isn't it? No?
It's Isaiah 53. Isaiah chapter 53. It's called the suffering servant. This is where the Christians base their theology on Jesus as Christ, as the suffering servant upon the cross. It's Isaiah 53, if you want to look it up. Okay? Rabbi Maybaum took this passage and expanded it and extrapolated it. Traditionally, I may add, because how do we explain this passage? It sounds just like Jesus, doesn't it? I mean, if you think about it, it sounds like just like him, right? He came for our sins and our iniquities, and he was wounded and all of these things. But what do commentators say about this? No, it's not talking about Jesus. Who's it talking about? Us. It's talking about the Jewish people. We are the ones that are the suffering servants. We are the ones that are inflicted with the wounds for humanity. It is us, the people of Israel, the Jewish people, who are suffering until Mashiach comes. And what he says is you know what? The Jewish people, in fact, became the suffering servant of Isaiah. The Jewish people collectively suffer for the sins of the world. That's what happened. Should know that we died there in Auschwitz because of the Nazis. We died there because God needed a lamb. He needed someone to suffer for all of the sins of the entire world, of the Christian world. And who did he choose as most beloved? But it wasn't Jesus on the cross. It was us in Auschwitz. We were that suffering servant. Now, you don't think that's radical theology? You don't think that's radical to come up and say in a pulpit in front of 1,000 Reformed Jews that, you know what, we were the suffering people? but that's the way he explained the Holocaust. Somehow he couldn't buy into this whole idea of God is omnipotent, God is this. They don't, who doesn't need this, who doesn't care about this. And he certainly doesn't care about observance. But what he did care about is, what about us as Jews? And we were that sheep in Isaiah 53. We were that people that God, for whatever reason, he promised it back then in those times before the destruction of the first temple, and he made it come to fruition in 1939 to 1945. Now, if you want to read a book about this, it's called God After Auschwitz. We are the atonement for the world. Vicarious atonement is what he called it. Yeah. You sinned. God needs atonement. He picked his favorite sheep, and it was the Jewish people. Now, what are the ramifications of this? I mean, if you think about it, what are the ramifications of this? What is he expecting the world to do? To bow down? Yeah, not bow down to us, but at least acknowledge that we suffered for humanity. There's no other reason. You can't tell me that 1.5 million children, if the bomb's question comes haunting back and forth, if he could have stopped it right there and then, and he does, he stopped, he saved Pinchas ben Eliezer, right? This guy, and 1.5 million children get burned for nothing. It's only because we are the atonement for the world. Woohoo!
How did that go over?
Well, it depends to who. It depends to who. To Jews, it didn't resonate very well. Because who wants to be an atonement? Want to be the suffering servant, a sheep? I mean, that's all we were down to, that we came because the Christians had sinned. To the serious Christians, took it seriously. I mean, maybe. I'll get more into this when I talk about the Christian response. And just a few tidbits about what Christianity has to say about this. But I just wanted to give you, this was a Jewish response. It wasn't only him. It was a number of rabbis, mostly Reform rabbis, because they have a wealth on Shandor. They have a much more broader worldview. Orthodox rabbis tend to have a very narrow, as you can tell, very narrow worldview. What has to do, but they took a view, because Orthodox Jews could care less what happens with the Christians. And all of my positions I took to you, but every Orthodox position had nothing to do with Christians. It had to do either with God or Jews, because that's all that matters in the world. Christians doesn't matter. Christians are just here because God made them. Had to fill up the world with somebody, so he filled them up with Christians. They could be Christians, they could be Buddhists, they could be, for all the Orthodoxy cares, it's nothing. I mean, it's only God and Jews, and that's the whole relationship. Everybody else comes to the prom because we need to have a room filled with people. But it's only God and the Jewish people standing in the middle. They're the king, they're the queen, the prom queen. That's all that matters. Reform took a much different position to the world. Reform said we're a part of a bigger world. Orthodoxy was very narrow. Defined the world very narrowly. It's us, God, and finished in Israel, and that's it. Who cares who's in Israel? It doesn't make a difference. To Reform looked at the world in its entirety, and Jews being part of the entire world. So to them it made perfect sense. I mean, to some of them, I mean, not all of them, but to Rabbi Meibam it made perfect sense. And he was a German rabbi, and saw himself and Jews as a collective, and they viewed the Old Testament much more relevantly than Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy will look at this suffering servant and say, you know what, when Mashiach comes, we'll worry about this. Who cares? But to them, they took it seriously. He read this and he said, who's it talking about? We waited 2,000 years for this to happen, and it happened. It was more Orthodox than the Orthodox, no? He looked at the Bible very seriously. So that position, to serious Christians, thought about it. But no one likes to be thrown at in your face. That we're the korban. We're your atonement. It makes them feel guilty. No one likes guilt. So the Germans bought it. Because the Germans always had to feel guilty. They had to be dragged through the mud. Otherwise, you don't learn any lesson. We would have been smarter and learned that if we would have taken the Germans after World War I and scattered them all over to the four corners of the earth, we'd never have to suffer again. It's like Shimon and Levi, we talked about it this week's portion. You take the Germans, you put 10 of them in Argentina, 10 of them in Uruguay, 10 of them in America, 10 of them, and just spread them out all over the world. You have no problem. All of them together with one Hitler, you have 55 million dead people. Let me just go through two more, and then we'll get to them. It's 9:30 already. Okay, I'll go through this very quickly. I already went through one. I only have one left. Okay, as I went through already. This was before I was ordained. Probably in the late 70s. Had an opportunity to spend a Shabbos with him at his temple. This was shortly after his son had passed away. He had a 14-year-old son that was just brilliant. I mean, was a concert violinist. I mean, he was a brilliant kid. He had a disease, the aging disease. Progeria. Passed away 14 years old. Okay? He's faced with his own Holocaust. Rabbi Kushner's no slouch. There's no lightweight. Doesn't take things easily. Sat down and came up with a philosophy and a theology. And that is that basically why bad things happen to good people. Has anybody read the book?
Yes.
If you read the book, you know.
We heard him speak at Brando.
You heard him speak. He's an eloquent guy. I mean, he's a wonderful person.
1,000 people standing there, and there were a lot of people crying.
That's not that. How could you not cry? Tell the stories. You're crying. So basically, what Rabbi Kushner did, and this view was promoted by many liberal theologians, both Christian and Jewish, is that he redefined God. Basically, what he did is he redefined God. He said you can't have your cake and eat it. This whole idea of Berkowitz's position of free will and then tracking around with omnipotence and omnipotence and all of that, it just doesn't work. God exists, but he's not omnipotent. Can't. Create a world, make it run, do what he can do, but he's limited. He's limited. Now, if he's limited, you can't have any arguments to him. Can't have any arguments. I mean, the problem, of course, with that theology is, of course, then what's the purpose of praying? I mean, if you can't help me, so who needs you? Now I'm going to go to Jesus if he can help me, or Muhammad if he can help me. And if you can help me, God, then what do? But to him, he found it very comforting. I mean, you know what? He still believes in God, and he believes in the covenant, and he believes in the uniqueness of the Jewish people and all of that stuff. So what he's changed around is just a definition of God. And then a lot of rabbis, I know, buy this position. I mean, because it feels comfortable and it makes it. But it's not. Again, as I mentioned, it's a very liberal position. I don't think it was adopted very much in the Orthodox world because we're just, that's the way it is. I mean, so with all of these positions, I mean, you have Rabbi Kushner's position, and you have Rabbi Berkowitz's position, and then you have Rabbi Maybaum's position, who is, of course, the suffering, and you have Fackenheim, who tells you don't give up your Judaism, and also a position of you're not going to understand everything. You take it together with who cares, position number one. Before that, you run the gamut already of different ways of how people are going to face this theological. I just want to end. Give me 1 second. Let me just end quickly with just a couple of Christian positions. Right? Christianity, as I mentioned before, also had to face this dilemma. Right? It came about and said, what are we going to do? If we're good Christians, what do we do? So, for some Christians, took the Satmar position. They said, listen, there's only one reason for this reason why. Deuteronomy chapter 28, read it. They're Bible believers. It says, if you like Dr. Kern said, it says in there, if you don't follow the rules and regulations, what happens? Boom. Finished. You're gone. Your history. Thank you very much. I'm going to punish you, and that's the way it goes. So Jews who are not faithful, God punishes them. Who do we know would agree with that position? Oh, there you go. Brad Robertson probably would take this position. If you're faithful, you're faithful. You're not faithful, you're not faithful. That's the way it goes. God brings a tsunami here to this country. Why? Because what did the mayor say today, right? Because God's angry at African Americans. God's angry at America, right? If you look up this website, I'm only using this word just to I don't care if you lose. GodHatesFags.com. Yeah. Okay. You look up that website and you'll see what this guy's position is. This is a Christian minister. And he travels around the country and he has a website called GodHatesFags.com. Okay. So he will definitely take this position. You promote homosexuality. This is what's going to happen to you. That you can have drugs, you can have this, you can have that, you can have that. Okay. Within Christianity, there was a thing called supersessionism. Superseding. It comes from the word to supersede. What did Jesus do? Where we thought the Jews were elected, what did Jesus do? He rejected the Jews and God elected the Christians. So once he elected the Christians, who cares about the Jews? Maybe there's something special. So they got killed. I mean, God has no relationship with them anyways. Right? Remember that a few years ago, the head of the Southern Baptist Convention said, God doesn't listen to the prayers of the Jews, right? Why doesn't he listen to the prayers of the Jews? Why?
Really?
Yeah, because they rejected Christ. They rejected Christ. God doesn't listen to the prayers to you. So what are you complaining about?
I think he got a trip to Israel really quick.
Did he get a trip to Israel?
Get indoctrinated.
Yeah, you think so? Met Meir Kahane or something there. No, but so to the supersessionist, it makes perfect sense. You rejected Christ and God rejected you. So what are you complaining about? You're the work of the devil. You had an opportunity early on. You were the first people to see him. You didn't accept him. So what are you complaining about? God's angry at you. Be happy that you're still around. So stop complaining. Okay, so that was a second position. The third position accepted Rabbi Maybaum's position, the fundamentalist. It's funny. Who came together? Rabbi Maybaum, the Reform rabbi, and the fundamentalist Christians. And they viewed the Jews as sacrificial lambs. They said, the world is bad. God had to take someone like this, and the sacrifice, and he took the Jews. Because God loves them so much, he took the Jews. And then he blessed them in the state in 1948. This is primarily fundamentalists believe this. You're not going to find liberal theologians that are going to believe this suffering servant business, but fundamentalists who believe in Isaiah 53, bought this position. A lot of Messianic Jews buy this position. Because, Jesus, the Jews, they love this position. We're the suffering lamb, Jesus came, did all of these things. I want to end up with one thought. One last position. And that position takes a different turn altogether. A guy once wrote that we're asking the wrong question tonight. We spent 2 hours, Rabbi, and we asked an entirely wrong question. The question should never be asked, why did God allow this to happen? The question should always be asked is, how do we still survive? How are we still around? After the Holocaust, how are there Jews still around? And the answer to that is if you look at Mark Twain. Mark Twain was not Jewish. I know he had a name like Shmuel Clemens, right? Or Samuel Clemens, but I think when they called him up to the Torah, he was Shmuel. Samuel Clemens was not a Jewish guy. But he wrote a beautiful introduction about the Jews, and he wrote about the Jews that they're a small little minority in the world. The small little minority exists, whereas big nations have come and banged the drums loudly. The Romans came, the Greeks came, and they're gone. And the Babylonians came, and they're gone. And everybody at that time came, gone, but the Jew exists. How is it? It's one of the great miracles of the world. How this happens, that the Jew over everybody else is still around. And this writer, after everything that we talked about tonight, and it's important, I think it was important to discuss all of these different issues, who believes this, who believes that, but the bottom line is, how it concerns us is not really ultimately the question. We lay our heads down tonight on our pillow. It's not why did God allow this to happen. It's how is it that we still exist. And the answer to that is as like Paul Johnson writes in the back of his book. It's one of the greatest historians today, Paul Johnson. It's not a Jewish guy either, but the history of the Jews. If you have not read the history of the Jews of Paul Johnson, I urge you to buy it. It's sold probably on I'm not sure, I didn't check it today, how much it's going for on Amazon, but I'm sure it's not much. It's a few dollars. You could buy it. If for my age, I like to buy the hardcover. It's a little bigger. The soft cover, the words are very small.
You can't find the hardcover.
You can't find the hardcover?
I have it.
Oh, I also have.
Must have got it a while ago.
Yeah, I also have the hardcover, but even, get the soft cover. Get the soft cover and read the book. And if you read it again, and especially read the back of the book, because in this back of the book he writes that the Jews have bought into their purpose so much that even if you don't believe in providential, he says, and some people may not, that Jews were the chosen people, but they believe in their purpose so much that they've written themselves into history. That ultimately they are stubborn, and he doesn't use the word stubborn, but he uses much bigger words than I'm able to, and I wish I could quote him from it. But that, my friends, is the real story tonight. The real story is that after the ashes of Auschwitz, after seeing everything, we did not lay down. We stood up, as we talked about, whether it was marriage, whether it was the establishment of the State of Israel, whether it was rebuilding our nation. We brushed ourselves off. We took what we had to take. Some people came a little bit more religious, some came a little bit less religious. All of that stuff, you know what? It all shakes out in the wash, as they say. The bottom line is, we exist because we believe in who we are. And that faith should never ever be diminished, regardless if you take position 1, 2 through 10 or 11. Am Yisrael Chai is all I can say. Thank you. Go ahead. Now this,
That really is like fucking,
that's right. He had a very challenging name.
Yeah.
But see, he based his theology basically
On having you to do it,
having to do it, because to him he built a philosophy around it, that it was a revelation and you have to keep doing it. This is just basically switching the question whether you believe in Berkowitz or Fackenheim or Maybaum or Rubenstein or I don't know, Wiesel. Take any position you want to take, an atheist, so whatever, doesn't make a difference. We here because we know we have a purpose. What that purpose is everybody in their heart it beats with some other purpose. But we continue to march on, and that is really the story of faith after the Holocaust. I'll tell you, there's nothing better than that. Nothing.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
No.
I'm still scared by assimilation.
Well,
Do you think do you think the next generation might turn that around?
I'll tell you honestly, one of the things that comes out of Berkowitz's position, Rabbi Berkowitz's position of free will, why it really, really resonates with me, is that we could make a difference. We don't lay down and turn over. We can make a difference. We're not waiting. I don't care about punishments. I'm not waiting for retributions. I'm not the suffering lamb. I'm not the Satmar's position. I'm not Maybaum's position. I could make a difference. Now, if it were just in fantasy, 1,000 committed people that would say, you know what, we are going to ensure that the next generation is going to be committed, and everybody extrapolates more and more, then I think we can save it. I think we can do it. But we are against a tremendous force. The force is apathy, not caring, and it's very difficult to fight apathy. See,
It's easier to fight the Holocaust.
it's much easier to fight. See, in Russia, it was very simple. You knew who the enemy was. The enemy was the anti-Semite. We were in the shtetl. That was it. I don't want go back to biblical times to quote Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, a great German rabbi of the 19th century. He asked a good question. We discussed this week in Torah class. Is why did Jacob go down to Egypt? Jacob could have established shop in Canaan, tell his son to move up to him. I'm not interested in going down. You come up to me. I like, why do I got to go to you? And the answer was because he felt that only in a ghetto can Jews survive. In a ghetto of Goshen, when they're surrounded by Jews, living with Jews, of Jews, by Jews, that's their best rate of survival. Once they allow themselves this freedom to interact with the Canaanites, Gamarnu. It's over. It's finished. It's going to be history. Now, if you look throughout history, it doesn't bode very well. Just that statement doesn't bode very well, because what does that mean? That means that we're better off not living over here. Get ourselves up, move to Israel. In Israel, chase out all of the non-Jews. We have to have a land of Jews, for Jews, by Jews. And and that's it. That message doesn't resonate very well with American Jews. If you're living here in California and I tell you, you're going to live in Pico Robertson and we'll build a little fence around it and throw out your internet and get rid of your television, who's going? No, Susan is absolutely right. I'll be running myself down the street. Acharai, after me, and then I'll be a one-man army. It doesn't resonate, that issue. So we have to make Judaism relevant for the average American. We got to go out there to the young people and tell them there's something within Judaism. But what does not either resonate with them is what we talked about tonight. They don't want to hear about the Holocaust. They're not interested in Emil Fackenheim telling them, you know what, every time you lay down and you go out with a non-Jewish girl, you are, Hitler's up there, hey, da, 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 da. And every time he sees a chuppah with two Jews, it's a knife in Goring's chest. Young people don't buy this anymore. The Holocaust is Europe, and I don't want to be burdened, because a lot of people argued, in doing research about tonight, there's a lot of people that argued, why do we even have to be discussing faith after the Holocaust? You keep burdening over and over with this lachrymose position of Jewish history again and again, with the Holocaust, with the calamities, with the genocide. We're not interested. I was born here in California. I don't know about the Holocaust. My grandparents were here already in California. What do I need to know about the Holocaust for?
European Bubby either. The
What?
generations coming up didn't have European
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. My grandparents were here already. I grew up in California here. I'm a Californian 3 generations. What do I got to do with Auschwitz? And you keep bothering me with Auschwitz, and then on top of that, you take the theology of the liberal parts of Judaism, which says that everybody is okay, everybody's all right, there's no specialness within the Jewish people, because chosenness of Jewish people is also a no-no. How can you say that the Jewish people were chosen? There's something special elected about the Jewish people? It doesn't sound good in America. America, we're all one big thing. So if they take this recipe together, everybody's the same, everybody's equal. Good people, send them to public school, educate them in this way. What do you get? You're going to roll the dice and you hope and pray that they meet a Jewish girl or a girl meets a Jewish guy. But we have to. I don't know. But we have to keep going. That's the bottom line. We got to. It's a challenge. It's a tough challenge here in America. It's not Europe with the Shtetlach. It's a biggie here. But nonetheless, we'll fight on.
Chabad is helping.
Right? Chabad is trying its best to do whatever it can to get rid of the Jews. But no.
So then,
Joking.
if God wants Jews to be a light unto the nations,
Right.
can we be a light just in our own little ghetto to the outside?
Yeah, sure, we could be, yeah, absolutely, but we can't be here in America. Jews won't go for it. I mean, just think about this. We talk about Mashiach. We started talking about one of the positions, of the Satmar Rebbe, that waiting for Mashiach. And we're also waiting for Mashiach. There's a lot of common ground we have with the Satmar. I mean, they're Orthodox, we're Orthodox. They're observant, we're observant. I mean, maybe theologically we have our differences, whether it's Zionism, and other issues in the non-Orthodox Jews. But basically, they're waiting for Mashiach. We're waiting for Mashiach. Okay, great. So I have to convince the world that I want everybody to wait for Mashiach. I want everybody to please, like the Rambam writes, the 12th principle of faith of the 13 principles, Ani Ma'amin B'Emunah Shlema. I wait every single day for the coming of Mashiach, and even though he may tarry, still I believe in him every single day, and I want everybody to believe that. I want you all to believe that what's going to happen when Mashiach comes, what's going to happen when Mashiach comes? He's going to, ingathering of the Jews, will take us all to Israel, will reestablish our kingdom in Israel, and the whole world will live in peace. Okay, so let's take this to its logical conclusion just for a second, since we're playing, games. Mashiach is going to come. Okay? I'm here a rabbi. I'm now going to go to Aaron Spelling's house. Guy lives in a 55,000 square foot mansion. I'm going to knock on his door. Mr. Spelling, Mashiach is here. Let's go. Where go? Who go? What go? Now you're coming. All the Jews are going. It says in the prophets, I'm going to collect them one by one by one by one. Spelling, let's go. Okay, so where are we going? We're going to Israel. What are we going to do in Israel? Everybody's going to have, all Jews are going to live together. Okay, where am I going? You, Spelling, since you were not such a good Jew to start off with, it meant you were not observant, you were a chazer and only collected money. I don't mean you were a chazer in the sense, but all you did was collect money, make money in pictures, and they weren't very nice to begin with, and it was actually crappy shows that you produced. And there were horrible shows that God was not happy with. So therefore, what we're going to do is we're going to give you a 2-bedroom apartment in Akko. Okay, Akko is a little city up north, not close to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem, we're going to have, who's going to be in Jerusalem? Maimonides, Moshe Rabbeinu, the patriarchs, Aaron Spelling, you're going to a 2-bedroom apartment in Akko. Okay, on your floor is going to be a few Jews living from Yemen, a couple of Jews from India, all of that stuff. And then you'd have to start to learn how to live with everybody, and you're going to give up your 55,000 square foot mansion. Okay, so here's Spelling's reaction. I don't want to say it because there's minors in the room, but Spelling's reaction to that kind of a proposal would be what? Kishmir. That's it, right? Thank you. I'm giving up my 55,000 square foot mansion to go with Mashiach. Tell Mashiach, I'll meet him there, right? So this is what we're talking about. You go to a guy, Michael Eisner, and tell him, Mashiach is coming. Jeffrey Katzenberg and Geffen and Spielberg, tell them Mashiach is coming. They should make movies about sacrifices, in the temple. About a bull being shechted. Come on. This doesn't play well, with the whole idea of Mashiach coming. So this is our challenge. Our challenge is to get to American Jews and to show them the relevance without fooling them. There's so many ways you can do it, because you can fool American Jewry, tell them, Judaism is actually Ben and Jerry's ice cream. So we'll package it as ice cream. Don't go to shul on Shabbos, buy a Rocky Road fudge. So we'll all sit down, instead of learning Chumash, we'll all buy, whatever it is, whatever thing, we'll meet together, eat a pound of ice cream or a quart of ice cream, and that's going to be Torah. We could do that. Who says no?
You must be hungry.
What?
You must be hungry.
Only for Ben and Jerry's. Only for Ben and Jerry's. But they're not Chol of Yisrael, so it's not, I can't eat it either, but it's all these restrictions, but it's terrible. But we could do that also, but that's not authentic Judaism. What are we doing? We're selling a fraud. That's a fraud to say that that's Yiddishkeit. So, but real Judaism is commitment. It's like you said before. So well, God gave us the mitzvahs in order for us to rein our urges in and to rein ourselves in, so we don't go crazy and we don't do all of these things that we're not supposed to do. But who wants to listen to that kind of a message? I mean, this is a land of freedom and the pursuit of happiness. And I want to feel good, and I want to do what I want to do, and then I have to come to shul and listen to it. Doesn't, yeah. And then Hebrew school Hebrew Academy tuition is very high. Many people can't afford it, $12,000 a year. If you have 2-3 kinderlach, you have 2-3 kinderlach, it's $24,000-$36,000. They'll give you a break, even half price, $6,000 a child. It's still very expensive for a guy that's not making it. In the world, it's hard to send them to day school, so you don't go to day school. Many people don't belong to temples because it's also not cheap. $1,800, $2,000 to belong to a temple. So before you know it, you don't have a day school education. You don't belong to a temple. You're not bar mitzvah. What happens? You sing yours, you lose them. You lose them. So, today I had an interesting discussion. I think I took the right position. I hope I took the right position. A guy called me up. He met a stewardess. The stewardess tells him she was Jewish. It turns out her father was Jewish, her mother was not, but she thinks of herself completely as Jewish. She goes around telling herself as Jewish. She was raised Jewish. She's Jewish. She was wearing a Magen David. She's Jewish. So this fellow, my friend of mine, he corresponds with about 10 different rabbis. So he emailed the 10 rabbis what their responses were. What should you do? Should you take this woman and bring her in? Try to educate her and then eventually maybe convert her so she would be Jewish according to all streams, or be real Jewish, or not. I mean, just tell her, hey, you know what? You're fooling yourself. So I was the second response. And my response was, I absolutely would bring her in. That's what I would do. I would bring her in. I would tell her, you know what? You're welcome to join our shul. Come to our shul. You're more than welcome. And then if the right time came, every time I had the opportunity, and tell her, listen, I want to be honest with you. We're Orthodox. This is the situation, and you have to make your own decision. But I would at least show her the beauty of Judaism beforehand. He said, you know what? I got 2 responses on the contrary. He said, we're already diluting enough our bloodline. So what do we need more for? Well, we need more. So there's not enough Jews that we have to worry about. We're going to spend our time now on non-Jews. So it's a different position. But to me, I mean, I think that we're if anybody who already thinks they're Jewish, so I'm on camera, so I won't even go to words. Someone already thinks they're Jewish. I think it's a mitzvah to bring them in. I mean, but again, you can't fool them. I mean, we're walking a fine line. I mean, but still, of course, bring them in. Talk to them. I mean, this.
My daughter is a flight attendant, and she has a friend who she was Christian, and she became Jewish, and she brings her children to Hebrew schools. We were at a bar mitzvah, which was the most beautiful bar mitzvah, and she read through the Torah and everything. So it is possible.
Oh, sure.
I have a daughter who is Jewish, and I can't get it through her head what to do.
Right. I hear you. I mean, listen, I'm all for conversions. I mean, that's for sure. The position, of course, would be, in the Orthodox world is that, if the person is not really Jewish and you're telling them that they are Jewish, then you're really fooling them. So what are you fooling them for and telling them that, they're Jewish? So, but you know what? Let God sort that out. That's His business. He put us into this position. Let Him take a little bit of responsibility on His own. He's a big boy, after we talked about him tonight, right? I mean, He can handle it. He's all powerful. He can figure this out too. Who is and who isn't, and what is and what isn't, and that's the way it goes. But I think we sometimes, in our own little insular world, we become a little bit, not so much arrogant, but we become a little bit, short-sighted, that's what I think, over the big picture. And there's only 14 million of us, and if I could convert 1 billion Chinese, I would do it in 10 seconds. Because I'd like to see the balance of the Middle East change when I show up with 1 billion Chinese Jews, to Jerusalem on the next Sukkot. To counter the Hajj, they have 3 to 5 million. I show up with 50 million Chinese Jews. You think the balance of power will change in the Middle East? You think they're going to attack us? No. We have China behind us. Believe me, I could guarantee you there's no Palestinian state. No chance, no talk, no nothing of a Palestinian state. Right? I'm this close to doing it. I'm this close. I just got to figure out a good recipe for a Jewish knish, and they're in. That's all I'm missing. If I could get a Chinese knish, I get 1 billion of them right down the line. Trust me. I mean, it's great. Even though, like a guy was quoting today, the rabbi quoted it, saying, you know what, it says in the Torah, and okay, he quotes from the Torah. I'm not diminishing it. It says God chose us because we're not the most numerous, and we're not the biggest populations, because you're kiyat ma'at mikol amin, because you are the least, and I love you because you're small and you're tender, and I love you. Great. And I agree with that. Listen, love us. But you know what? Being small is no shame. But it's nothing to be proud of either. That's what I say. You know what? If we could pick up another 500 million Jews, believe me, it changes every single thing. Everything changes in the world when you have 500 million. I mean, listen, there's a billion Muslims in the world. And a billion Catholics. You don't think that they're confident? A Jew walks around all day freaking out. You don't know if we're going to be here tomorrow or the next day. 14 million is like nothing. 0.00001% of the population. 1 billion Chinese men, and we have it made. Okay, we're getting there. We're getting there.
I stumbled across a magazine called Outreach the other day, and maybe it's the Reform that puts it out. But if their numbers are to be believed, there are 250,000 non-Jewish women married to Jewish men who are raising the children Jewish.
Yes.
I mean, given our numbers, that's astonishing.
Of course, I believe that. So we're talking about, I mean, what the Reform movement passed the Patrilineal Descent issue in the mid-'80s. So we're talking 20 years now of a Reform movement, of the Reform movement recognizing children born of a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother, as long as they raise their children Jewish, as Jewish. So you're talking about 20 years. I'm not surprised about 750,000, absolutely. I mean, you know what? Listen, you know what? This is a question that's going to be debated. See, many people argue already. You know, we have a limited amount of communal dollars. I mean, how much money do you have already to fight assimilation? Let's do inreach. I mean, let's build up what we have inside and forget about those. We're willing to take losses, like any good. You know, if you're a captain in an army, you're stuck in. You're in a rough position. You're on a hill, and you got to save your platoon or not save the platoon. So you have to cut your losses. You know. A guy can't make it, and you're going to be able to save 9 out of 10 or 8 out of 10. You do it, and that's their position. They say, let's cut our losses. Everybody that's assimilated, forget it. Go, have a good day. But you have 1 or 2 million committed Jews in America. Stick with those 2 million committed Jews. The other, what are the 5 million, 4 million, whatever happens, Kesher, Saran, finished, and goodbye. No, but I can't buy that. I just can't see. We've come so far. We're talking about for 2 hours about the Holocaust. How Jews walked into the gas chambers. I knew Hitler's definition of a Jew was not, he couldn't care less. You brought your baptismal papers. Your father was Jewish, your mother was Jewish. You think he could care less? You could stand there and debate on 1 foot, about the matrilineal descent. He put you in the oven. He didn't care. So to me, losing 1 Jew is like losing a sheep. The reason why Moses was chosen as the leader was not that he said, I'm going to care about the 50 rams. The 50 rams I have in my herd and the sheep, forget about them, who cares? They're weak anyway, not going to be able to make the trek through the desert. I'll just pick the rams. No, you cared about every single sheep. There's a whole story, you go around, a legend that he chased 1 sheep for 7 days. That's how he ended up on the mountain with God. And that was the first revelation God came to, because he saw that this guy really cares about even the lowest of his herd, not the highest. Listen, to love the Lubavitch Rebbe, you don't have to be a big genius. To say, the Rebbe was important within Judaism, doesn't take a genius to recognize that. But what about the guy standing outside, born in Ogden, Utah, that doesn't know anything? That's the guy we have to worry about, I think. We have to go after that guy as well. But everybody we have to go. We can't be choosy.
Can't be arrogant either.
And we can't be arrogant either. We got to grab everybody we can.
That book you said by Rabbi Kushner?
Yeah.
Bad things happen to good people.
Yeah.
What I got out of the book is that God made the world and said, okay, now, I've done everything.
You run it.
And you run it. Things happen. It's your fault. But if you need help, you need courage, you can appeal to me. That's it.
That's what it is, Go no hide enough, I say teku. All these questions, there's an expression in the Talmud, teku. Tishbi yetaretz kushes v'bois. When they get to a point in the Talmud, when they go through this lengthy discussion and argument, and they exercise already all of their arguments, and they're exhausted, and they still haven't come to a conclusion, there's one word, they say teku. What's the teku? Tishbi yetaretz. Tishbi is Elijah, it comes from Tishbi. Elio Navi, Elio Tishbi. So Elijah will come and answer all of these questions, meaning that when Mashiach comes, he'll be able to settle all of the disputes. So right now, our job is, discussion is good, and I believe very much in discussion, to argue and to try to understand, and the questions and answers came forward, was good, and talk about all different forms, and, but the bottom line is that when we walk out the door tonight, we've got to remember that we still have a job to do, and that's to stay connected to Judaism, and all those that are close to us, to connect them to Judaism, and that's why we'll ensure that Hitler will always be defeated.
That's right.